What's up, guys? Welcome to Wizardium. We've got something special today. What if Harry and Hermione were transporting to the Marvel Universe as Sorcerer Apprentices? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The Wrong Door. The last thing Hermione remembered clearly was telling Harry it was a bad idea. Not in a general, vague, this gives me a bad feeling way. She'd been specific. She'd held up the Unspeakable's report, jabbed her finger at paragraph 7, subsection C, and said in a voice that carried perfectly across the stone chamber, "This equation has an unsolved variable, Harry. You cannot open a dimensional aperture with an unsolved variable. It's not caution, it's mathematics." Harry had looked at the equation, looked at her and said, "Croker says it's fine." Croker is 68 years old and hasn't published a single original paper since 1987. He seemed pretty confident. Confidence is not a substitute for correct arithmetic. Harry had given her that look, the one that was half apology and half absolute refusal to back down, the one she'd known since they were 11 years old, and said, "It'll be 5 minutes. We go in, we verify the Lee line reading, we come back." That had been approximately 45 seconds before the aperture turned violet, which it was not supposed to do, and then turned white, which it absolutely was not supposed to do, and then made a sound like the universe clearing its throat before swallowing them both. The landing was not graceful. Hermione hit a wooden floor hard enough to feel it in her teeth, rolled, and came up on one knee with her wand already out, an automatic response so deeply trained it bypassed conscious thought entirely. She swept the room in a half-second, cataloguing, polished hardwood floor, an impossible amount of books stacked in configurations that defied gravity, artifacts on shelves that radiated enough magical energy to make the hair on her arms stand up, windows that showed a city street she didn't recognize, and Harry 3 feet to her left, already standing with his wand raised at the doorway. "You okay?" he said without looking at her. "Bruised, you, same." He turned his head slightly. "Where are we? Not the Department of Mysteries." She stood, keeping her wand up. The magical pressure in the room was enormous, not hostile, but dense, like standing at the bottom of a deep lake. Something about it was fundamentally different from anything she'd felt before, not darker or lighter than what she knew, just structured differently, like a familiar song played in an entirely foreign key. "The Lee line energy here is different," Harry said. "I was going to say structurally unprecedented, but yes, different." The door opened. She didn't fire because Harry didn't fire, and because the person who came through it wasn't moving with threat. They moved with absolute, almost eerie calm. A woman in long robes, pale as birchwood, her head shaved close, her eyes the kind of old that didn't match her face. She looked at them, at 2 people crouched in her foyer with wands leveled at her head, and smiled with the patience of someone who had seen considerably stranger things before breakfast. "You came through the aperture on the eastern ley line," she said. Her voice was quiet, warm, and gave absolutely nothing away. "I felt the signature 6 minutes ago, dimensional in nature, but not from any access point I recognize." She tilted her head slightly. "Those aren't sling rings." "No," Harry said. He hadn't lowered his wand. "They're wands. Who are you and where are we?" The woman looked at his wand with an expression of genuine interest, as if she'd just spotted a rare bird. "Fascinating, channeling focus objects. Wandcraft traditions died out in most dimensional streams centuries ago." She finally looked back at his face. "I'm the Ancient One, and you're in the Sanctum Sanctorum in New York City." A pause. "New York City on a branch of the dimensional multiverse that, based on the signature you're carrying, is not your origin point." Hermione lowered her wand, not because she was satisfied, because her brain had just caught up with the last 30 seconds of information. "You felt the aperture signature. You can read dimensional energy in real time." She heard herself ask it more urgently than she meant to. What was the structural composition of the collapse? The color shift in the aperture went from standard violet to white. "I've never seen that before." "Was it a—" Hermione? Harry's voice was flat. "What, wand still up?" She looked at her own hand. The wand was in fact still up, pointed at the ceiling while she'd been talking. She lowered it. The Ancient One's smile deepened slightly. "The white signature indicates a cross-dimensional collapse. The aperture didn't just open, it merged with an existing rift. Something on this side was already pulling." She moved into the room with that unhurried grace, and sat in a high-backed chair as if she'd been expecting exactly this conversation. "Please sit down. I'd offer tea, but I suspect you have more pressing questions." "You have no idea," Hermione said. Harry sat down slowly on the edge of a settee, wand resting across his knee but not put away. Hermione noticed he was doing the same mental inventory. She was cataloguing exits, assessing threat level, holding 2 plans simultaneously. 22 years old, and he still moved through unfamiliar rooms like he expected them to try to kill him. She supposed they both did. "Can we go back?" Harry asked. He said it simply, without panic, and she loved him for it, the ability to ask the most terrifying question in a completely level voice. The Ancient One was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone stalling, the silence of someone choosing precision. "The aperture that brought you here collapsed on both ends simultaneously. The rift that pulled you through has already sealed. The pathway that existed for approximately 4 seconds is gone." Harry's jaw tightened. "So that's a no." "That's a not yet," she said, "and possibly a not from here. The energy of a cross-dimensional collapse doesn't simply disappear, it redistributes. If we can locate where it redistributed to." She paused. "But that's not a conversation for right now." Right now you've just fallen through the floor of reality, and I suspect you'd like to understand where you've landed. New York, Hermione said. You said New York, but she looked at the windows at the street outside. There was nothing obviously wrong with it. Yellow cabs, people on sidewalks, a food vendor on the corner, but something about the weight of the place was different. The magical pressure she'd felt when she first arrived was coming from outside as much as inside. This isn't our New York. No, this one has different complications. The ancient one settled back slightly. For instance, there's a tower approximately 20 blocks north built by a man who wears a mechanized suit of armor and once helped stop an alien invasion. One of our Avengers recently returned from space. A man in Brooklyn who should by biological law be dead has been fighting a covert intelligence war for 3 years. She watched their faces with quiet attention. I'm telling you this not to alarm you, but because you are observant people and you'll notice the differences within hours, and I'd rather you have context. Harry and Hermione looked at each other. It was the look they'd developed over years, a full conversation compressed into 2 seconds, conducted entirely through eye contact. It said, "This is very strange. Yes, are we handling it? We appear to be handling it." "Good, okay," Harry said. He sounded almost relaxed. "So we're in a dimension with magic, mechanized battle suits, and a functional Asgardian presence based on your reference to space, and we don't currently have a way home." He paused. "I've had worse Tuesdays." The Ancient One looked at him. "It's Thursday. Even better." Hermione pressed her fingers to her temple. "What we need," she said, thinking out loud in the way she always did when her brain needed to organize itself, "is information. Dimensional theory as understood in this universe, mapping of the local Lie-line structure and access to whatever records exist on cross-dimensional rifts, specifically unsolicited rifts, events that originated without a deliberate aperture being opened on this side." She looked at the shelves. "Those books, are they catalogued?" "Extensively," the Ancient One said. "By subject or by dimensional origin?" "Both." Hermione stood up. "I'd like to start with whatever you have on dimensional collapse signatures." She stopped. "Please, if that's, I apologize, I'm being presumptuous. This is your home and the library is through the second door on the left," the Ancient One said. "The cataloging system uses Sanskrit notation, but I suspect you'll have it decoded within the hour." She paused. "The books on the upper shelves require either a ladder or a moderate amount of spatial bending to access. I imagine you'll manage." Harry looked at her with an expression Hermione recognized as deeply amused. "She already likes you," he said quietly. "Shut up. She showed you where the library is within 3 minutes. She showed me nothing. You were pointing your wand at her head. You were also pointing your wand at her head. I lowered mine to point it at the ceiling while you asked about aperture signatures." The Ancient One stood, which ended that particular argument. "There's a room on the 3rd floor that's been unused for some time," she said. "It has 2 beds, which I suspect you'll require. The Sanctum's wards will recognize you as guests within the hour. Until then, avoid the East Wing. It has a complicated relationship with unfamiliar magical signatures." She looked between them. "And I'll want to speak with you both tomorrow morning about what I'm proposing, but tonight rest. You've just survived a dimensional collapse. Your nervous systems need time." Harry opened his mouth. "Yes, even yours," she said before he could speak. He closed his mouth. She left them in the foyer with the kind of exit that left no room for argument, not fast, not dramatic, just completely finally gone, as if she'd simply ceased to be present in the space. Harry and Hermione stood in the loaded silence of the sanctum. "Well," Harry said. "Don't," Hermione said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were going to say something like, 'At least it's interesting,' or could be worse, and I need you to not." Harry considered this. "I was going to say that I told Croker it was a bad idea." Hermione turned to look at him. He had a bruise forming on his left cheekbone from the landing and his glasses were slightly bent, and he looked, for the first time in months she realized, awake. Not the careful, managed wakefulness he'd been wearing since the war ended, like a man making sure nothing showed on his face. Actually genuinely alert. "You told Croker it was a bad idea," she repeated. 2 days ago he didn't listen. I should have been more insistent. I told you it was a bad idea this morning." "Yes, and I didn't listen either. I'm equally culpable." She stared at him. "Are you seriously trying to share blame right now?" "I'm seriously trying not to have an argument about this in a stranger's magical library in a parallel dimension." He checked the watch on his wrist. The face had cracked in the fall, so he squinted at it. "Probably around 6 in the evening local time based on the light. Can we argue about whose fault it is when we're not quite so lost?" It was, she reflected, an irritatingly reasonable thing to say. "Fine," she said. "Library." "Library," he agreed. "And then food. I'm starving." "You're always starving." "I fell through a dimensional collapse. I'm entitled." She was already walking toward the second door on the left. The library was, in a word, staggering. Not in size, it was a large room, but not impossibly so, but in depth. The energy that came off the stacked volumes was layered and complex, and after 6 years of spending more time in the Hogwarts library than most people spent sleeping, Hermione could read a library the way other people read faces. This one said, ancient, vast, carefully tended, and full of things that will hurt you if you approach them casually. She approached the nearest shelf and read the spines. Sanskrit, as promised. Also Tibetan, several forms of Arabic she couldn't immediately place, something that appeared to be an extinct Sumerian dialect, and 3 scripts she didn't recognize at all. She pulled out the nearest volume with familiar careful reverence, the same way she'd have handled a first edition Hogwarts tome, and opened it. The text rearranged itself. She blinked, looked again. The characters on the page had shifted, not dramatically, more like a sentence stretching itself out, breathing, and then settled into something she could almost read. Not English, not any language she knew, but almost. Harry appeared at her shoulder. He looked at the page. "It's translating," he said. "Attempting to. The Sanctum's wards must key to comprehension. The text is trying to find a form we can access." She watched the letters move. "It's extraordinary. The books are semi-sentient. The Hogwarts textbooks tried to bite you if you didn't return them on time. That's entirely different and nowhere near as sophisticated." She watched the text settle into something approximating late Latin, not quite, but close enough. Dimensional theory as applied to the stable multiverse. This might actually be what I need." She sat down cross-legged on the floor with the book in her lap. Harry pulled a chair over and sat beside her. Not reading over her shoulder, he knew she needed space to think, but present, which was its own kind of thing. She was aware of him the way she was always aware of him, that background certainty she'd stopped examining years ago, because examining it led places she wasn't sure she was ready to go. "We'll figure out a way back," he said quietly. "I know." She turned a page. "But there's something," she said, "about the rift being pulled from this side. That means the dimensional collapse wasn't purely our equipment failure. Something on this side was already creating instability." She traced a line of near Latin. "I want to know what. You think it was deliberate?" "I think it might have been." She looked up at him. "And I think the Ancient One knows more than she told us tonight." Harry nodded slowly. "Yeah, I got that impression too." He leaned back in the chair, stretching arms overhead, and for a second he looked 18 again in the tent, in the long waiting dark, working out a problem together. "She's watching us, testing something, obviously." Hermione returned to the text. "She didn't flinch at our wands. She knew exactly what they were and found them historically interesting rather than threatening. She read our dimensional signature from 6 minutes away. She decided within 30 seconds of meeting us that we were trustworthy enough to sit down in front of." She paused. "She sees something she expected, or something she hoped for. They let that sit between them." Outside, New York rattled on, the city noise coming through the Sanctum's thick walls as a low, constant hum, different from London, different from the world they knew, but alive in the same relentless way that all cities were alive. Harry was quiet beside her, which was a gift she'd always valued in him. He had the rare ability to be company without being noise. She read for an hour. He found a book of his own from the shelf, something she'd have expected him to choose, heavy on application rather than theory, an atlas of dimensional rift events, and read it with the focused attention he brought to things that mattered. By the time darkness had fully settled outside, she'd made 11 pages of notes on parchment she'd pulled from her bag. She always had parchment, and Harry had flagged 6 passages in the atlas with strips of paper. "There's a pattern," he said. She looked up. "What pattern?" He spread the atlas open across the floor between them and pointed. 6 rift events in the last 18 months, all cross-dimensional, all with white signature collapses. That's what the Ancient One described. And all of them, he traced the marked passages, all of them pulled things through rather than opening symmetrically, one-directional rifts. He looked at her. "That's not natural dimensional behavior, is it?" "No," she said slowly. She got up and knelt beside him to look at the passages properly. "Natural rift events are symmetrical. They open and close on both sides simultaneously. A one-directional collapse means something is directing the energy on one end." She looked at the dates. "These started 8 months before we arrived, so we might not be the first ones pulled through. Or we might be the first ones, the unravelers." She stopped. Harry looked at her. "The unravelers, that term is in the atlas, in the dimensional theory text, as a historical reference, a faction that was supposedly extinct, practitioners of a form of dimensional manipulation the main sorceress bodies outlawed approximately 400 years ago." She grabbed the book from where she'd left it on the floor and flipped back through her notes. "Here, the unravelers, they believed that the multiverse was overcrowded with redundant dimensional streams and that by collapsing redundant branches you could concentrate dimensional energy into." She stopped reading and looked at Harry. The expression on his face matched hers. "Into a harvestable form," she finished. "They're not extinct," Harry said. "No, and they've been creating rifts." "And our world is in the multiverse," Harry said. He said it very quietly and very calmly, and she knew him well enough to hear what was underneath it. "Which means our world is a candidate for what they'd call a redundant stream." The Sanctum settled quietly around them. Outside, a cab horn sounded, sharp and ordinary and completely indifferent to the thing they'd just worked out. Hermione sat back on her heels. Her mind was running fast and cold, the way it always did when a problem crystallized into something real and dangerous. "We need to tell the Ancient One what we found." "Tomorrow," Harry said. She said, "Tomorrow." "Harry, Hermione." He met her eyes. "We've been in a parallel dimension for 6 hours. We've just worked out that there might be a faction of interdimensional sorcerers trying to collapse our world. We are doing remarkably well, all things considered. We can tell the Ancient One in the morning, we can eat something and we can sleep, and we will be significantly more useful for all of that." He paused. "There's also the question of what Wang left on the kitchen table, because I smelled something that was either extraordinary food or a very flavorful potion when we passed the hallway." She stared at him. "I'm serious about the food," he said. Hermione laughed. It came out strange, slightly high, with a note of frayed edges, but real. Okay, she said, food, sleep, ancient one in the morning. And we don't panic, I never panic. You don't panic visibly, there's a difference. He said it without cruelty, just precision, because he knew her better than almost anyone alive and she'd stopped minding that years ago. Internally, you've been running at about 300% since we landed. So have you? Yeah, he agreed, but I'm better at faking it. She closed the books, stacked them neatly, force of habit, and they went to find the kitchen. Wang was already there. He was a broad, serious man with a face that defaulted to expression-free and eyes that processed everything slowly and methodically, and he was eating noodles from a takeout container with the focused attention of someone who had learned to appreciate meals whenever they occurred. He looked at them when they came in, assessed them with 2 seconds of consideration, and pushed a second takeout bag across the counter without saying anything. Harry picked it up. Thank you, Wang nodded. I'm Harry, that's Hermione. We fell through a dimensional rift. The Ancient One said we could stay. I know, Wang said. I felt the rift. Hermione opened the bag, found dumplings and noodles and something spiced and extraordinary smelling, and sat down at the table. The rift has a distinctive signature, she said. White phase collapse, have you seen that before? Wang looked at her. Once, he said. 3 months ago, something came through then as well. He returned to his noodles. It left. What was it? Not relevant now. Hermione opened her mouth. Harry put a dumpling in it. She swallowed it, determined that it was genuinely excellent, and decided this wasn't the time to argue. We found references in the library, she said more carefully, to a faction called the Unravelers. Wang went completely still for half a second. It was barely perceptible. Then he kept eating. Where did you read that? The dimensional theory text on the east shelf, 3rd row. That text is in Sanskrit. The Sanctum translated it to Near Latin. I can read Near Latin. Another pause. You've been here 6 hours, he said. Yes. He considered her for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry, who was eating with the efficient speed of someone who'd spent years in situations where you ate when you could. You found the same thing. We worked it out together, Harry said. 6 rift events in 18 months, all one-directional, all matching the Unraveler methodology from the historical records. He looked up. Is the Ancient One aware? Yes, Wang said simply. And she brought us in rather than sending us away because you're the first beings who have come through the rift rather than being taken back through it. Wang set down his chopsticks. He had the manner of a man who gave information slowly, not from evasion but from a careful sense of weight. The other events, the rift events in the last 18 months, they've all been extractions. The Unravelers opened the rift on this end, pulled something through and collapsed it. You came through uninvited. And your signatures are different. Different how? Hermione asked. The Unravelers pull things through with a designed collapse. The rift is engineered, controlled. Wang picked up his chopsticks again. You came through a rift that collapsed around you rather than for you, which means you carry the energy signature of an uncontrolled cross-dimensional event. He met her eyes. You are in the most literal possible sense marked by the rift in a way that allows you to perceive and interact with rift space in ways that trained sorcerers cannot. A pause. The Ancient One has been searching for that signature for 8 months. Harry and Hermione looked at each other. She expected us, Harry said, not a question. She expected someone, Wang said. She didn't know it would be 2 of you. Harry leaned back. Something shifted in his expression, not alarm, not resignation. Something more like recognition. So there's a reason we're here, a reason we got pulled through. There's a reason the rift responded to you, Wang said. Whether that's the same as a reason is a philosophical question, and I tend to leave those to the Ancient One. He collected the takeout containers. 3rd floor, eastern hallway, last door. The room's been made up. He paused at the door. Your magic wand-based, channeled through intent and emotional resonance. Essentially, Hermione said. Dimensional sorcery here is different, but the underlying architecture, he seemed to be choosing words. The underlying architecture is not so different from what you described. Intent and emotional resonance can move mountains in this building. He looked at Harry. I'd say that might be relevant to you specifically, but based on what the Ancient One said, I suspect you both already know that. He left. Harry stared at the door for a moment. He's a font of information once he gets started. He's careful, Hermione said. He measures what he says. I find that reassuring rather than evasive. She looked at her notes spread across the table alongside the remains of the food. Harry, yeah, if we're here because the rift responded to us, if there's some kind of attunement between us and the rift space, then finding the way home might not be about reopening the same door, Harry finished. It might be about learning to read the rift space itself. Which means we're not just waiting to go home. She met his eyes. We're working toward it, actively, by training with a woman who is clearly at least several centuries old in a universe that contains actual Norse gods while also apparently being marked by dimensional energy in a way that makes us useful against a faction of multiverse-collapsing extremists. Yes, Harry picked up the last dumpling, considered it, and ate it. Well, he said, at least it's interesting. She told herself she wouldn't laugh. She laughed. The room on the 3rd floor was exactly what the Ancient One had promised: 2 beds, a window that looked out over the city, and the quiet particular to very old buildings, which was different from silence. It was the hush of something that had been standing long enough to absorb the energy of everything that had passed through it. The sanctum's warmth was strange but not unwelcoming. The wards that Wang had mentioned as needing time to recognize them were already softening. She could feel it in the way the magical pressure in the room had adjusted from attentive to settled, as if the building had decided they belonged there. Hermione set her bag on the chair beside her bed and stood at the window for a moment. New York at night was extraordinary, the scale of it, the density of light, the particular American confidence of a city that genuinely believed it was the center of the world. There was a tower to the north with a lit ring at the top. Stark Industries, presumably. She filed that away. You should sleep, Harry said from across the room. He'd already taken off his boots and was sitting on the edge of his bed reading the Rift Atlas again by the lamplight. Says the person still reading. I read to wind down, you read to rev up. Different. That's not that might be accurate. Go to sleep, Hermione. The multiverse will still need saving in the morning. She turned from the window. He looked up from the book at the same moment, and for a second they just looked at each other in the lamplight, in a room in a parallel dimension, 6,000 miles or some entirely different number of miles from everything they knew, and she thought, we're okay. Somehow we're actually okay. Hermione, he said. What? He held her gaze for a moment, and something moved through his expression that she couldn't quite name. Nothing. Sleep. She climbed into bed. He turned off the lamp. The city hummed outside. The Ancient One found them in the library at 7 the next morning, which was both expected and slightly annoying, as Hermione had hoped to get another 2 hours of reading in before anyone required anything of her. The Ancient One walked in with tea, 2 cups, prepared correctly, which was either excellent intuition or the Sanctum had told her something, and sat across the low table from where Harry and Hermione had spread their notes. She looked at the notes, she looked at them. You've already found the Unraveler records, she said. Last night, Harry said. One confirmed you were aware. Yes, so when would you have told us? Harry asked it without accusation, just straightforwardness, the particular honesty he'd always had that cut through diplomatic fog. The Ancient One looked at him. This morning, she said. I wanted to see what you'd find on your own first. Testing us, Hermione said. Evaluating you. There's a difference. She set down her tea. You understand the situation more fully than most of my students do after a month of study, so I'll speak plainly. She looked between them. The Unravelers are not a historical curiosity. They are active, they are accelerating their operations, and based on the rift signatures of the last 8 months, they are approximately 4 to 6 months away from completing a dimensional collapse sequence that would eliminate between 3 and 7 dimensional streams, including ours, Harry said. Yours is on the list, yes. She said it without softening, which Hermione respected. The energy they harvest from each collapse fuels the next. They've done 2 so far. Small streams, dimensions with limited magical or technological development, minimal resistance. She paused. Your stream has been flagged as the next primary target. The magical density of your dimension is extremely attractive to them. It represents a significant energy yield. The room was very quiet. Harry sat with his hands loose on the table, and Hermione recognized that particular stillness in him, the same one he'd had before some of the worst moments of the war, not fear. The opposite of fear, actually, a kind of terrible clarity. They were already coming for our world, he said. The rift that took us, that wasn't our equipment failure. No, the Unspeakable's experiment created a weak point in your dimensional membrane. The Unravelers detected it and used it, but your equipment failure happened simultaneously, and instead of a controlled extraction, we fell through, Hermione said. Yes, which the Unravelers did not plan for. 2 individuals carrying raw rift collapse signatures with independent magical systems arriving in a universe with active sorceress infrastructure. The Ancient One's expression was as close to satisfied as Hermione suspected it ever got. From their perspective, that's a complication. Because we can track them, Harry said. Because we carry the rift signature. Because you can feel the rift space, the Ancient One corrected. Which is not a skill that can be taught. It can only be And the Unravelers will know within a week or so that 2 people came through rather than nothing. Which means, they'll come looking for us, Hermione said. Almost certainly. Harry looked at Hermione. She looked back at him. The conversation they'd had at 11 years old, standing in front of the mirror of Erist while Voldemort waited behind a locked door, had looked something like this. The problem is real, it's dangerous, and we're the only ones in position to do anything about it. All right, Harry said. He didn't say it dramatically. He said it the way he'd always said it, as if the decision had already been made somewhere slightly before the words arrived. What are we doing about it? First, the Ancient One said, training. Not because you're insufficient, your magical foundation is extraordinary, and I have no intention of spending 3 months teaching you basics you've already surpassed. But your magic and the sorcery practiced here operate on different systems, and I want you both to understand the architecture of this system before you need to use it in a crisis. She looked at Hermione, particularly because I believe you will synthesize the 2 approaches in ways that haven't been done before, and that synthesis may be exactly what's needed. Hermione felt the thing she always felt when someone understood what she was capable of, not gratitude, exactly. A kind of sharpening, a sense of yes then. When do we start? She asked. This morning. The Ancient One stood. I'll have Wong show you the training grounds. She paused. One thing, you may meet another practitioner here today. He'll be territorial and possibly rude. I'd ask you to extend patience. Who is it? Harry asked. His name is Stephen Strange. He was until recently a neurosurgeon. He is now my most advanced student, and he has strong opinions about who belongs in the Sanctum. A very slight pause. He's excellent, but he occasionally confuses excellence with authority. Don't let him intimidate you. Harry glanced at Hermione. We survived Dolores Umbridge, he said. We'll manage. The Ancient One left. Harry finished his tea. Hermione gathered her notes. Outside the library window, New York was fully awake, loud and indifferent and extraordinary, and somewhere in the structure of the multiverse, something had noticed that two people from the wrong dimension had landed somewhere they shouldn't be. She was already thinking about how to use that. Chapter 2, Translation. The training ground was on the second floor, behind a door that didn't exist until Wong touched the wall and it decided to. Hermione watched the door materialize out of smooth plaster with the detached scientific focus she applied to everything that surprised her, cataloging the mechanism, not an illusion, not a concealment charm, but a genuine spatial fold, the doorway occupying a place that was simultaneously there and not there until the correct intention was applied to the correct point. It was extraordinary. She wanted 6 hours and a notebook. She got a brisk nod from Wong and a doorway. The room beyond was large, circular, with a domed ceiling painted in geometric mandalas, and a floor of pale stone worn smooth by decades of footwork. Artifacts lined the curved walls in glass cases, sling rings, folded cloaks, small relics that radiated contained energy like compressed springs. The light came from no visible source and sat at that particular quality of not quite morning that made everything look both sharp and slightly unreal. Wong stepped to the center of the room and turned to face them. "Tell me what you can do," he said. Harry and Hermione exchanged a glance. "That's a broad question," Hermione said. "Start broad." Harry pulled out his wand and the room's energy shifted subtly in the way a dog's ears swivel toward a sound. The sling rings on the wall hummed slightly. He noticed it, tracked it, filed it away. "Spellwork," he said. "Charms, transfiguration, defensive magic, combat casting. I'm better at instinctive rapid-fire casting than complex prepared workings." He paused. "Patronus, which I mentioned because it turned out to have dimensional properties apparently based on what the Ancient One said last night." Wong looked at him steadily. "Show me the Patronus." Harry raised his wand. He didn't reach for a memory, not the way he'd had to at 13. The magic lived closer to the surface now, worn in like a callus. Expecto Patronum, and the stag came. It came at full strength, silver-white and blazing, filling the room with light that pushed back every shadow in a single pulse. It was enormous, not in the theatrical way of something trying to impress, but in the way of something that genuinely was, a creature of condensed will and warmth that moved through the room and left the air charged in its wake. The sling rings on the wall didn't just hum. They rang, clear and individual as bells, each one vibrating at a different frequency. Wong stared at the stag. The stag looked back at him with silver eyes that held intelligence the way real deer don't. Then it dissolved and the light went with it and the room settled. "The resonance," Wong said after a moment. He was still looking at where the stag had been. "The sling rings responded to the Patronus signature." "They did," Hermione said. She'd been watching them. Each ring vibrated at a different frequency, which suggests the Patronus magic is broadcasting on a spectrum that overlaps with the dimensional resonance built into the rings. She was already moving toward the cases. "May I?" Wong opened the nearest case without comment. She picked up a sling ring and held it in both palms, feeling the metal's energy cool and complex, layered like sediment, with an underlying architecture that was similar to but not identical with the Patronus resonance she'd just watched. "The sling ring's key to dimensional membrane vibration," she said, half to herself. "They open doors between spatial points by generating a sympathetic resonance with the membrane. And the Patronus," she looked up. "The Patronus is pure projected consciousness, intent-made material. If the two frequencies overlap, then the Patronus can theoretically interact with dimensional membrane," Harry said. He was watching her with that expression he had when she was working something out, quiet attention, no interruption, absolute confidence that she'd get there. Not just interact. Locate. A Patronus follows its caster's intent, it goes where you send it. If it can also read dimensional membranes, she set the ring down, picked up her quill. "Harry, do you think you could direct the Patronus toward a specific dimensional signature rather than a specific spatial location?" "I've never tried," he said, "but I don't see why not." Wong said, "That would be unprecedented." "For your magical system," Hermione said, not dismissively, just accurately. "One magic operates on different axes. We don't have the same dimensional manipulation capacity you do, but we have significantly higher emotional bandwidth in our casting. The Patronus specifically," she looked at Harry. "We should test that today if possible." "After I see what you do," Wong said to her. He closed the case. "You said he's better at instinctive rapid casting. What are you better at?" Hermione considered the question for one honest second. "Precision," she said. "Complex prepared workings, arithmetic structuring of spells, building layered enchantments with specific conditional triggers, transfiguration at a molecular level." She paused. "And I've done some theoretical work on time and space manipulation that the Ministry classified before I finished it, so I'm not entirely sure of the upper boundary." Wong looked at her for a moment. "The Ministry of Magic, our governing body, they classified it because they were worried about misuse rather than because it was wrong." She kept her voice even. She'd been furious about it for 18 months. "I have my notes. I'd like to read them," Wong said. "I'd like access to the full library catalogue in return." "Done." He nodded at the center of the room. "Show me something." She thought for a moment, then walked to the center of the floor, stood on the worn pale stone and transfigured it. Not a simple object transformation, she reached into the molecular structure of the stone and rebuilt it outward, growing a chair from the floor itself, pulling the matter into new configurations, the stone flowing upward and reshaping with the smooth inevitability of something that had always been meant to be furniture. She didn't use a specific transfiguration incantation. She'd stopped needing those at 17 for anything below advanced human transfiguration. She just described what she wanted in her mind with complete specificity and let the wand carry the intent. The chair that grew from the floor was perfect, every detail down to the grain in what had been stone and was now something closer to wood and stone composite, the particular curve of the back, the exact weight distribution that made it comfortable. She sat in it. Harry began laughing quietly from somewhere behind her. The spell range, Wang asked. I don't currently know. She stood and returned the chair to floor. I've never found the limit in a way that felt like a limit rather than a practical consideration. It gets harder with living matter, and human transfiguration requires a specific discipline I'm still developing, but for non-living matter, she looked at the room. I could probably redecorate. Wang said nothing for a beat. Then we start with the sling ring architecture. If your theory about the Patronus resonance is correct, then we need you both to understand how the rings work at a fundamental level before we try using them as a locator. He moved to the case and opened it again, lifting 2 sling rings and holding them out. These open spatial folds between fixed points. The mechanism is intention plus geometric precision. You visualize the destination with specific dimensional coordinates, not just a physical location. The ring generates the resonant frequency and the portal opens. He paused. It took Stephen Strange 4 months to open his first reliable portal. Harry took a ring and turned it in his hand. He looked at it the way he looked at a new broomstick, evaluative, interested, not intimidated. What's the geometric visualization like? Is it like drawing a map or more like holding a feeling? More like both simultaneously, Wang said. Harry nodded, slipped the ring on and gave it a single practice rotation. A portal opened. It was small, about the size of a dinner plate, and it only lasted 2 seconds before it collapsed, but it was unambiguously a portal, a clean orange-rimmed fold in space that showed, briefly, a different piece of the room from a perpendicular angle before it snapped shut. Wang stared at it. Too small, Harry asked. Strange's first attempt, Wang said carefully, produced a sound like a door hinge and an orange spark. Beginner's luck, Harry offered. Unlikely. Wang looked at him with an expression that was recalibrating something behind the eyes. Do it again, larger. Harry opened a portal again, this time the size of a doorway, edges clean and steady. He held it for 6 seconds, turning the ring to control the aperture. It breathed slightly at the edges, the way a flame breathes in a draft, and he adjusted for it with the same unconscious precision he'd have used to adjust his grip on a broom in Crosswind. Then he let it close. He looked at Hermione. She was smiling, that specific smile she had when something delighted her, and she was trying not to show it. The emotional bandwidth, she said. Right, he said. It responds to intent and feeling. That's just magic. For us, she said, not for everyone. Wang set down the second ring and looked between them with an expression that had abandoned its careful blankness and arrived somewhere closer to genuine interest. The Ancient One said your magic was extraordinary, he said. I assumed she meant by civilian standards. He picked up the ring again. I did not assume she meant by ours. She didn't know either, Hermione said. She's testing as she goes. She always is. He moved to the center of the room. All right, let's begin properly. What I'm going to teach you is not just how to use a sling ring. I'm going to teach you the geometry of dimensional space as this tradition understands it, because that geometry is what you need to locate the rift signatures you're carrying. He looked at Hermione, and because I suspect you'll find something in it that we've missed. She picked up her ring. Beside her, Harry rotated his again experimentally, and another portal opened and closed with the ease of breathing. Show off, she said. You grew a chair out of solid stone and sat in it. That was a demonstration. So's this. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling and turned to Wang. All right, the geometry, where do we start? They were an hour into the dimensional geometry lesson, Hermione taking rapid-fire notes while also attempting to open portals, which created the interesting effect of her successfully generating portals to wherever she was mentally picturing while actively thinking about other things. When the door opened and Stephen Strange walked in. He was tall, with dark hair silvering at the temples, and the kind of face that had been handsome before it learned to be severe. He wore camouflage robes with an ease that said he'd stopped thinking about them, and the cloak of levitation rested on his shoulders like it was making its own choices, which Hermione strongly suspected it was. He walked in mid-conversation on a communication device, said, "I'll call you back," to whoever was on the other end, and stopped when he saw them. His eyes went to Harry first, the open portal small and neat, spinning slowly on Harry's ring finger, and then to Hermione, who was writing on a notepad while a somewhat larger portal hovered open beside her, showing the east wall from behind. Then he looked at Wang. "Who are these people?" he said, "and why do they have sling rings?" "They came through the rift," Wang said. "The rift, the white signature one?" "Yes." Strange looked back at Harry and Hermione with the full weight of a man who had been, until recently, the most technically gifted person in any room he entered. His expression was not hostile precisely, but it was doing a very specific kind of work. the kind that involved rapidly calculating whether the thing in front of you represented a problem or a threat or something in the annoyingly complicated middle ground. Harry let his portal close and met Strange's assessment without blinking. "Harry Potter," he said. "She's Hermione Granger. We're from a different dimension. We've been here 12 hours. We've already read most of your Unraveler records, and the Ancient One is aware." He paused. "Nice cloak." The cloak of levitation's collar lifted slightly. Hermione watched it with delight she kept internal. Strange looked at him for a long moment. "How long did it take you to open that portal?" "The first one, about 3 seconds after Wong explained the mechanism." Something moved across Strange's face. It was controlled quickly, but she caught it, a flash of something she recognized from years of watching brilliant people encounter things that didn't fit their models. Not anger, a kind of recalibrating surprise. "And her," he looked at Hermione. "The portal she's got open right now while simultaneously writing." "I'm a natural multitasker," Hermione said without looking up. She let the portal close and capped her pen. "Dr. Strange, I've read about your work in the Sanctum archives. The Ancient One's notes on your training are filed in the dimensional theory section if you were wondering about the reference material. Your spatial manipulation is extraordinarily precise. The portal geometry you developed for long-range stable apertures in year 2 of your training is actually very close to a modified arithmetic circle I worked out independently at 16. She looked up. "I think we should compare notes." Strange stared at her. "You were 16. I was doing a lot of reading." He looked at Wong. "Where did you find them?" "They found us," Wong said. Strange walked further into the room slowly, and Hermione could see him building the picture, their accents, the ones at their belts, the portal still faintly warm in the air where Harry had closed it. He stopped in the center of the room and crossed his arms. Wong said, "White signature rift. That means you're carrying rift collapse energy. Which means the Ancient One wants to use you to track the Unraveler apertures." He looked at Harry. "She's told you." "This morning," Harry said, "including that our world is on their list." Strange nodded slow. "And you're not leaving?" "We can't leave," Harry said. "The rift's closed. Going home means going through the rift space, and for that we need to understand the rift space, and for that we need to be here." He held Strange's gaze. "Which means we're not in competition with you. We're just in the same building, working on the same problem from different angles." Strange was quiet for a moment. It was the quiet of someone genuinely processing rather than performing thought. "The arithmetic circle you mentioned," he said to Hermione. "The one similar to my long-range aperture geometry. What were the dimensional coordinates you were working with?" She had her notebook back open before he'd finished the sentence. She found the page, 16-year-old Hermione's cramped, precise handwriting, the circle constructed around a modified 3-dimensional coordinate axis with an emotional resonance variable she'd never been able to justify to anyone's satisfaction, and held it out. Strange looked at it. His face did something complicated. "You added a 5th axis. Emotional resonance as a dimensional variable," she said. "I couldn't prove it mathematically when I was 16, but I've had more context since. In our magic system, intent and emotion physically affect the outcome of spellwork. If that's true dimensionally, then dimensional space has an emotional topology," he said. He was staring at the notebook now. "I've been working on a version of this for 3 months. I couldn't get the 5th axis to stabilize." He looked up at her. "How did you stabilize it?" "I didn't at 16. But since arriving here," she looked at the sling ring on her hand, "I think the missing variable was experiential. You need to have been through the dimensional rift to understand the topology from the inside. The mathematics only works if you felt it." Strange looked at her with a new expression. Not friendly exactly. Strange didn't do friendly the way regular people did. But it was a look she recognized, the look of a scientist encountering valid data from an unexpected source. "You should talk to Stark," he said. "The man in the mechanized armor," Harry said. "He's also the foremost dimensional physicist on the planet when he's not being insufferably smug about it." Strange glanced at Harry. "Can you cast anything beyond portals?" "Various things," Harry said. "Defensive shields, combat spells, transformation, and the Patronus, which apparently resonates with your sling ring frequency." Strange looked at Wong. "You heard the resonance." "The whole case rang," Wong confirmed. Strange looked back at Harry, and Hermione watched him make the decision, the one she'd been waiting for since he walked in, the point where he decided whether they were a complication or an asset. It wasn't an easy decision for him, she could see that. He was not a man who gave ground easily. "The Patronus resonance," he said. "If it interacts with dimensional membrane, it could locate Unraveler aperture signatures," Harry said. "Hermione worked that out last night. Then we need to test it before the Unravelers know you're here." Strange uncrossed his arms. "There's a pocket dimension, a practice space accessible from the East Wing. Minimal risk if something goes sideways." He looked between them. "You have 3 weeks before the Unravelers' projected timeline for their next extraction event. We should be working on the locator problem before we spend more time on sling ring basics." He said it in the flat tone of someone who was accustomed to accelerating training schedules on the assumption that everyone would keep up. "We've already covered the sling ring basics," Hermione said, "including the emotional topology of the dimensional geometry and a working theory on Patronus membrane resonance." Strange looked at Wong. 12 hours, Wong confirmed. "A beat." "Right," Strange said. "East Wing then." Now he left. The cloak flared behind him. Harry and Hermione stood in the training room. "I wouldn't say he's warming to us," Harry said. He absolutely is, Hermione said. He just does it at a different temperature than most people. They followed Strange to the east wing. The pocket dimension was accessed through a mirror that opened sideways, not into a reflection but into a space made of folded geometry, the same pale nothing-colored light as the training room but stretched in directions that didn't correspond to compass points. Hermione stepped through and felt the shift in magical pressure immediately. They were inside the dimensional membrane rather than on one side of it, which was like the difference between floating on water and being submerged. The rift collapse energy she'd been carrying since they arrived responded to it like a tuning fork to a matched note. It rang in her bones. Harry stepped through behind her and she saw it in his face too, the resonance, immediate and physical. He stood still for a second, eyes slightly unfocused, and then he said quietly, "Oh, yes," she said, "that's, I know." Strange came through last and looked at them. "You feel it." "The rift space," Harry said. "We're inside it, aren't we? This pocket dimension is adjacent to the dimensional membrane." "Yes." Strange walked past them. "Most sorcerers can access this space and use it for training but don't have a particular sensitivity to the membrane topology. For you," he paused, watching them. "Based on what you're describing, it should feel different. Like coming home," Harry said, and then looked surprised at himself for saying it. That's not right, more like recognizing something." Strange looked at him with sharp attention. "That's the rift signature. You're resonating with the membrane because you've been through an uncontrolled collapse. The membrane recognizes the signature." He looked at Hermione. "Can you locate the directional source of the resonance?" She closed her eyes. The feeling was not simple, not a single note, but a chord, layered and directional. The primary resonance came from everywhere and nowhere in the way that immersion always did, but underneath it, separate from it, she could feel something like a current, a direction, several directions, faint. "There," she said and pointed. Strange looked where she pointed. Then he opened a sling ring portal in that direction and checked it. "That's the primary unraveler aperture location," he said. He looked at her. "That's the one we've spent 3 months trying to locate precisely. And it took me 30 seconds, she said. "Yes," he closed the portal. "Don't be smug about it. It's not a skill, it's an accident of how you arrived. It's still useful," she said. "Extraordinarily," he allowed with the grace of someone who found the word mildly painful to produce. Harry said, "I want to try the Patronus in here." Strange looked at him. In a pocket dimension directly adjacent to the dimensional membrane, a Patronus with sling ring resonance could interact with the membrane architecture in unpredictable ways. Or predicted ways if Hermione's theory is right, Harry said. "Or that." Strange stepped back. "Go ahead." Harry raised his wand. The pocket dimension was a strange place to cast. The light was wrong and the spatial cues were off, but he'd cast in worse places. A cave, a forest in the dark. The inside of a tent during a British winter at the worst year of their lives. He reached for the feeling he always reached for, not a specific memory but a specific presence, the thing that lived underneath the memory, the warmth of the people he'd chosen and who'd chosen him back. Hermione beside him was part of that without him quite deciding it should be. Expecto Patronum. The stag came and the pocket dimension came alive. It wasn't like it had been in the training room where the sling rings had resonated. In here inside the dimensional membrane, the Patronus light didn't just ring in the physical objects, it sang in the space itself. The geometric structure of the pocket dimension, the invisible framework of the folded reality, lit up in response. Every angle and intersection and dimensional fold suddenly visible, drawn in silver light like a map. And in the map, clearly, unmistakably, like heat signatures in a dark room, 3 points of foreign signature, sharp and angular against the smooth light of the membrane. Unraveler apertures. Harry, Hermione breathed. "I see them." He didn't dismiss the Patronus. He walked the stag forward slowly and watched the way it moved through the space, not into the apertures but alongside them, reading their energy the way a dog reads a scent trail. Stag's silver light played off the foreign signatures and separated them, making them individual, distinct, locatable. 3 of them, different distances. Strange was very still. He was watching the membrane map with the expression of a man who had built a complex theoretical structure for a long time and was watching it be confirmed. "The nearest one," he said. "The Patronus is reading it closer than the other 2. It's also brighter," Harry said, "more recently active." He looked at Strange. "The Unravelers used it not long ago. Within the week," Strange said. He looked at Hermione. "The emotional topology variable. It's in the Patronus architecture. The magic reads the emotional resonance of whoever opened the aperture and it's using that to date the signature. Because the Unravelers had intent when they opened it," Hermione said. "And intent has temporal residue," Strange finished. He looked at her and something between them clicked, the same click she'd felt the first time she and Harry had worked out a problem together, the frequency match of 2 minds that operated at compatible speeds. "You're not wrong about the 5th axis. I'm never wrong about mathematics," she said. "I'm occasionally wrong about people, but not mathematics." "Can it hold?" Strange asked Harry, who was still running the Patronus along the aperture signatures. "For a while," Harry said. "But he looked slightly strained, the way he had after the hardest Patronus casts of the war when he'd been holding the charm against Dementors for extended periods. It's not quite like casting it normally. The membrane it's pulling at it like casting into a headwind. The membrane wants to absorb the Patronus energy," Strange said. "It's pure consciousness and intent. The membrane is essentially alive in a dimensional sense and it's attracted to that kind of energy." He made a decision visible in the set of his shoulders. Release it. Harry let the Patronus go. The map disappeared. The pocket dimension returned to its featureless geometry. They stood in the blank silver light, all three of them. So we can find them, Harry said. We can find their apertures, Strange corrected. Finding the unravelers themselves is different. They won't be adjacent to the apertures, they'll be deeper in the rift space beyond the membrane. He looked between them. And going into the rift space beyond the membrane is not something I can do. The collapse signature that would allow navigation in there, he stopped. You'd need to have come through an uncontrolled collapse to navigate it. Which we did, Harry said. Yes, so we're the ones who go in, Hermione said. Eventually, Strange said. Not yet, not until we know more about the unraveler structure, their numbers, their next extraction target timeline. He moved toward the mirror exit. But the locator theory works. We have 3 aperture positions and we have a mechanism. He paused at the mirror and looked back at them. I'm going to contact Stark. Hermione looked at Harry. He looked back with the same thought. Here we go. They emerged from the pocket dimension into the east wing and found the Ancient One standing in the corridor, which meant she had either been passing by or she'd felt what happened in the pocket dimension. Based on everything Hermione understood about her so far, it was definitely the second one. She looked at all 3 of them. Her expression was serene and completely unreadable. Well, she said, I see you've made progress. The Patronus works as a membrane locator, Strange said. 3 apertures mapped. The emotional topology variable is valid. He paused, and the pause had a texture to it, reluctant but honest. Their training is ahead of where I'd have predicted. The portal worked, the locator theory, it shouldn't be possible at this stage. I know, the Ancient One said. You expected it. I hoped for it. She looked at Harry and Hermione. Your magic doesn't operate on the same dimensional axes as our sorcery. It reaches emotional and intentional registers that our system underweights because we train them out. What you're doing isn't just adopting our methods, you're showing us what our methods look like at full depth. She said it with something that was as close to warmth as her manner ever produced. That's what I brought you here for, not to train you, to learn from you while training you. Harry said. He stopped, started again. You could have led with that. Could I? She looked at him mildly. If I'd told you last night that I intended to learn from you while you learned from me, you'd have felt obligated to perform rather than simply work. I needed to see you work without that pressure. She turned. Wang has prepared lunch. I suggest you eat before you theorize yourselves into dehydration. She looked specifically at Hermione when she said it. Hermione was already thinking about the 5th axis. In a moment, she said. Now, the Ancient One said. The thing is the emotional topology. Now, Miss Granger. Harry touched her elbow and steered her gently toward the kitchen. Food, he said. You've been going since 6 this morning. So have you. I ate 3 helpings of Wang's noodles last night. I have reserves. She went with him because the Ancient One's tone had closed the conversation and because she was actually hungry. The corridor they walked was lined with the artifacts and geometries of a magical tradition centuries older than the one she'd grown up in, and she noticed things as they passed: a hanging mandala that rotated in response to her attention, a window that showed a different city than the one outside, a door that she was fairly certain led to a space that didn't exist in this dimensional layer. You okay? Harry asked. He said it the way he always did, quiet, not demanding, leaving her room to answer fully or deflect as she needed. She thought about it honestly. I'm better here than I've been in a long time, she said, which is strange considering. Yeah, he said, same. The ministry was, I know. It wasn't terrible, she said carefully. I just felt like I was working at half capacity all the time, like driving a car in first gear. Everything I wanted to do that was interesting was either classified or bureaucratically impossible, or too much for people to be comfortable with, Harry said. Yeah, she glanced at him. You felt that way at the Aura department. I felt like I was supposed to just be the name on the reports and let everyone else do the actual thinking. He pushed the kitchen door open. Here nobody knows who I am. He smiled, and it was the real one, not the performed one she'd watched him manage for 2 years of peacetime. It's brilliant, actually. She felt something warm and complicated in her chest that she'd been feeling with increasing frequency for at least a year and had been very carefully not examining. Brilliant is one word for it, she said. Strange was already in the kitchen, eating standing up over the counter and reading something on a phone-like device with the energy of a man who never stopped working. Wang was plating food with meditative calm. The Ancient One sat at the table with tea and what appeared to be a small piece of correspondence she was ignoring. I'm contacting Stark this afternoon, Strange said, not looking up from his device. You said that already, Wang said. I'm saying it in front of them so they're prepared. Prepared for what exactly? Hermione asked, sitting down. Tony Stark is, Strange made a gesture. You need to meet him with your guard up, not because he's dangerous, because he is the most aggressively curious person you'll ever encounter, and if he decides you're interesting, which he will because you are, he will not stop trying to understand you until he has a complete model. He finally looked up. That process is exhausting and occasionally invasive and also produces genuinely useful results. He sounds like me, Hermione said. Strange looked at her. God help us, he said entirely seriously and went back to his device. Harry sat down next to Hermione and accepted a plate from Wang with the sincere gratitude of someone who meant it. Under the table, his knee bumped hers and stayed there, the kind of unconscious contact they'd had since the tent, since the year of living in each other's immediate orbit, and she didn't move away from it. Strange was already talking to someone through his device, the tone clipped and professional. Sanctum this afternoon, yes, it's worth your time, and no, I won't explain on the phone. And outside, the city was making the particular lunchtime noise of 1 million people existing in unconcerned parallel, completely unaware that in a 3-story building in Greenwich Village, something was being built that the multiverse had apparently been waiting for. The afternoon came in gold through the sanctum's tall windows, and Strange sat at one end of the table in the library with a star chart of dimensional aperture locations, and Hermione sat at the other end with her notes, and the fifth axis mathematics she was rebuilding from scratch with actual dimensional data rather than theory, and Harry sat between them on the settee with the Rift Atlas and a very good pen, marking the aperture map Strange had generated against the historical event records. Nobody talked much. It was one of those working silences that felt like its own conversation, the productive quiet of people thinking hard in proximity. The cloak of levitation drifted over at one point and examined Harry's atlas markings with what he could only describe as editorial interest. It tapped one of his marked entries. He looked at it. You think I missed one? The cloak tapped again more firmly. Here, a satisfied settling, he marked the entry. Thanks. The cloak drifted back to Strange's shoulders with an air of accomplishment. Does it do that often? Harry asked Strange. Constantly, Strange said without looking up. Useful, incredibly annoying, and yes, useful. Hermione looked up from her notes. The 6th Rift event in the Atlas, she said. The most recent one before ours. What came through? Strange looked up. He and Wong exchanged a glance. What? She said. Nothing came through, Wong said carefully. Something was taken. Put down her pen. What was taken? Another pause. Strange set down his own pen. A person, he said. A practitioner from a dimensional stream adjacent to yours. We managed to recover them. The Unravelers didn't complete the extraction, but the attempt told us several things. The Unravelers aren't just taking energy from the collapses. They're collecting people with specific magical signatures, building something. He looked at her steadily. We don't know what yet. Or why, Wong added. Hermione looked at Harry. He was already looking at her. The dimensional collapse energy, she said slowly. The Unravelers harvest it to fuel their next operation, but if they're also collecting magical practitioners with specific signatures, she thought through it fast. They need the people to direct the harvested energy. The collapse alone isn't enough. You need conscious magical intent to weaponize it. That's our current theory, Strange said. Which means they're building a directed energy weapon out of dimensional collapse, Harry said, fueled by harvested rift energy operated by abducted magical practitioners. He paused. They're not trying to collapse dimensions for the energy alone. They're trying to collapse dimensions on purpose with precision to eliminate specific streams, and the people they're collecting are the precision instrument. The library was very quiet. Strange looked at both of them. We've been working on that theory for 3 months, he said. You worked it out in 45 seconds. Fresh eyes, Harry said. Fresh information, Hermione corrected. We had one piece you didn't have, the fact that our equipment failure wasn't random. The Unravelers targeted our dimensions specifically, which means the streams they're collecting people from aren't random either. They're selecting for something. She looked at Strange. What was the signature of the practitioner they tried to extract? Strange said, similar to yours. Silence. Similar how? She asked. High emotional bandwidth, Strange said. Intent-based magic, strong Patronus analog. He looked at her directly. We thought it was a coincidence, now I don't. Harry stood up. He wasn't dramatic about it, just moved, the way he moved when something clicked into a decision. They're not collecting just anyone, he said. They're collecting people whose magic can interact with the dimensional membrane the way ours does. Intent-based, emotionally driven, high-resonance practitioners. He looked at the others. They need us specifically, not for our magic in general, for what our magic does to the membrane. Which is what our magic did to the pocket dimension, Hermione said. The Patronus lit up the membrane architecture. What would happen if you forced that at scale? If you directed that kind of intent resonance at a targeted dimensional stream, it wouldn't collapse it, Strange said slowly. It would, he stopped. The star chart on the table began to glow faintly as he worked through it. It would dissolve it, clean, surgical, not a collapse which is messy and unpredictable, a dissolution, one stream targeted, removed from the multiverse without residual energy scatter. He looked up. They're not bombing dimensions, they're erasing them. The room held the weight of that for a moment. Then Hermione picked up her pen, opened a new page of her notebook and started writing. Right, she said. Then we need to stop them before they have enough practitioners to make that work, and before they work out that we're here and come for us, she wrote without looking up. How long do we have? 4 to 6 months, Strange said, conservatively. Then we have 4 months to be ready, Harry said, because I'm not giving them 6. Strange looked at him. Something shifted in the room's atmosphere almost imperceptibly. It wasn't warmth, exactly. But it was the recognition between people who have looked at a genuine threat and decided, without drama, to go toward it. No, Strange said. Neither am I. The afternoon light moved across the library walls, and somewhere beyond the sanctum's wards, the city lived its enormous, oblivious life, and at the table 3 people from different worlds and one from multiple began planning in earnest. The kind of planning that feels less like strategy and more like inevitability, the sense of something clicking into place. Harry caught Hermione's eye across the table. She was deep in mathematics, 3 thoughts ahead of the conversation, pen flying. But she glanced up at exactly the right moment, as she always did, and the look between them was brief and complete. "We've got this," it said. Obviously, she answered with her eyes. He smiled. She went back to her notes. And outside, New York moved on in its relentless, indifferent way, not knowing what was coming, not knowing who was in that building on Bleecker Street, choosing, for the second time in their lives, to stand between the thing that mattered and the thing that was trying to destroy it. Chapter 3. New York doesn't know what hit it. The attack came on a Wednesday, which felt somehow inappropriate. Harry had been on the roof. He'd found it the previous evening, a flat section above the Sanctum's third story, accessible through a narrow door that the building had apparently decided to show him, since it hadn't been there Monday. New York from above was a different city than New York from inside, louder and quieter simultaneously. He'd taken to going up there in the early mornings with coffee, which Wang made extraordinarily well and dispensed without comment, and sitting on the worn stone parapet watching the city assemble itself for the day. It was the closest thing to flying he had. He missed his broom with a specific physical ache that he didn't talk about, because there were larger things to miss and larger problems to solve, but the roof helped. He was up there at 6:40 Wednesday morning, coffee cooling in his hands, watching a garbage truck navigate the corner below with the determined patience of something that had done this corner 10,000 times, when the ward bell rang. Not an actual bell, a sensation, deep in the sanctum's architecture, transmitted through the stone and the wood and the particular magical density of the building's bones. He'd been living inside the sanctum's wards for 4 days, and he'd learned their language faster than he'd expected, the same way he'd always learned threat languages, not through study but through attention, through the kind of listening that happened in the body rather than the mind. The ward bell said, "Something is here that should not be." He was off the parapet and through the roof door before the coffee hit the ground, the third-floor corridor, the second floor. He was moving fast and silent, one drawn, when Hermione came out of their room already dressed. She'd heard it too, through whatever developing sensitivity the rift signature had given them, and she had her wand up, and her expression was the one that meant she'd been awake for a while and had been thinking about something specific. "East side," she said. "I know. How many? Can't tell yet." She was already moving. "The ward signature is, it's not like a normal intrusion. Something is bending space inside the ward boundary rather than breaking through it." He caught up with her in 3 strides. "So they came through a pocket fold, not through a door, which means they know how to work inside the sanctum's defensive geometry." That was not a comfortable thing to know. He filed it without letting it slow him down. The corridor bent left and they took it, and then the east wing opened up ahead of them, and the air there was wrong, cold in a specific directional way, and carrying that particular charge of recently displaced dimensional energy, the same taste as the pocket dimension Strange had shown them, but rougher, uncontrolled, or rather, controlled in the way of someone who understood the geometry but didn't particularly care about collateral damage. Wang came from the other direction at a flat run, which was extraordinary to watch. Wang moved with the kind of compact urgency of someone who had decided that panic was structurally inefficient and had eliminated it from his operational vocabulary. He had 2 sling rings spinning and a look on his face that was the Wang equivalent of alarm. "3 of them," he said, "inside the east wing barrier. They're wearing unraveler marks. I saw it on the sensor array. They're not here for anything good." "Are they ever?" Harry said. Strange appeared from the staircase below, the cloak already full and active around his shoulders, and he looked at Harry and Hermione with an expression that was approximately 3 parts assessment and 1 part reluctant trust. "You two with Wang," he said. "East wing entry is through the red door. I'll come in from the upper fold. We push them toward the center where the wards are strongest." He paused. "They'll be expecting sorcerers. You use your wands first. The signature will confuse them." "For how long?" Hermione asked. 2-3 seconds. "That's enough," Harry said. It was. 2 to 3 seconds was an eternity. They went through the red door. The East Wing in crisis was a different animal than the East Wing in training. The space here was already destabilized. The unravelers had opened microfolds throughout the corridor, small dimensional pockets that disrupted spatial continuity, the way a choppy sea disrupts a swimming lane. Walking in a straight line required conscious correction. Hermione adjusted after 2 steps, her brain applying the geometry she'd been absorbing all week with the automatic speed of someone who treats understanding as a physical survival tool. Harry didn't bother adjusting geometrically. He moved the way he always moved in disrupted environments, which was by feel, threading the spatial distortions like a seeker threading bludgers, instinctive and fast. Wang opened sling ring portals at either end of the corridor, establishing sight lines, and Harry saw them. 3 figures in grey-black robes, moving through the east wing with the confidence of people who had done this kind of thing before. 2 of them were working in tandem, hands moving in the geometric patterns of dimensional sorcery, opening the microfolds, using them as cover, dismantling the sanctum's interior wards piece by piece with the methodical focus of locksmiths. The third stood slightly back and watched. The one watching turned. He was tall, angular, with a face that had been handsome before something had happened to the left side of it. The skin there was wrong, too smooth, the kind of wrong that spoke of magical alteration rather than accident. He saw Harry and Hermione and his expression moved through surprise into something sharper. He said something to the other two in a language Harry didn't recognize. Strange had said the wand signature would confuse them for 2 to 3 seconds. Harry didn't wait for confusion. He raised his wand and cast Reducto at the ceiling above the two working unravelers. Not at them, at the ceiling, at the section they were using for spatial reference, the geometric anchor point for their microfold array. The ceiling section collapsed with a crack of stone and plaster that filled the corridor with dust, and the microfolds destabilized simultaneously, every one of them flickering and collapsing as their reference anchor disappeared. Hermione, moving in his peripheral vision, cast something wordless and complex. He knew the shape of her complex workings from years of standing next to them, the way the air tightened and then released, and the East Wing's own wards, which the unravelers had been dismantling, slammed back into place in a single surging reconstruction. Not a restoration, an amplification. She'd fed power into the ward architecture directly, the same way she'd fed power into the Patronus map in the pocket dimension, and the East Wing's defenses suddenly ran hotter than they'd been before the attack. 2 seconds. The angular unraveler, their leader, Harry decided, raised his hand and did something that wasn't wand magic and wasn't sling ring sorcery. It was a third thing, structured somewhere between the two, and it hit Harry's reconstructed ward line like a hammer. The ward held. The corridor shook. "He's strong," Hermione said beside him. She didn't sound alarmed. She sounded analytical, which was its own form of alarming to anyone who didn't know her. "Yeah," Harry agreed. The leader raised his hand again. Harry cast Protego Maxima, not the basic shield, the fully extended version, the one that had held against Death Eaters and Voldemort's own spellfire, the one he'd learned to throw up in the time it took most people to think the word. It caught the unravelers working and turned it, not absorbed it, turned it, redirected the energy back along its own vector, and the corridor wall behind the leader buckled outward. The leader stared at him. Harry looked back. "Hi," he said. One of the other unravelers made a move toward Hermione. That was a tactical decision so poor it was almost impressive, and it went wrong for them immediately. She didn't bother with a standard shield. She cast Petrificus Totalis with the precision of someone who had fired that spell in the pitch black of a dungeon at 11 years old, and the unraveler locked rigid in mid-movement and hit the floor like a tree falling. She followed it immediately with a binding variation Harry hadn't seen before, something she'd modified, the charm reinforced with a dimensional anchor that pinned the binding to the Sanctum's ward architecture. The bound unraveler wasn't just frozen. He was fixed to the building itself. "Can't portal out," she told Harry without looking at him. "I've anchored him." "Nice, thank you." The second working unraveler threw a dimensional fold at her, a micro-collapse aimed to disorient rather than injure, the kind of spatial disruption that would leave most sorcerers momentarily lost in their own position. Hermione walked through it, not with a counterspell. She walked through it, the rift signature she carried, simply not caring about engineered spatial disruption in the same way a fish doesn't care about water. She came out the other side of the fold 3 feet closer to the unraveler, who looked, for the first time, genuinely uncertain. She cast Expelliarmus. It was technically a disarming charm designed for wand-based opponents, but what it actually did was sever the connection between intent and working. It disrupted the magical bond between the caster and whatever they were casting. On a sling ring sorcerer, that meant the sling ring flew off the hand and hit the corridor wall with a metallic ring, and the dimensional working collapsed mid-construction, and the unraveler stood there with his right hand suddenly very empty and a very specific expression on his face. Then the cloak of levitation came through the wall, through the actual wall, phased, and wrapped around him so thoroughly and so quickly that he was simply a bundle of self-tightening fabric in approximately 2 seconds. Strange stepped through a portal above them. He looked at the scene below, one unraveler pinned to the floor, one wrapped in his own cloak, the corridor wall buckled outward from a redirected attack, the East Wing wards running hotter than usual, and then he looked at the leader who was still standing in the corridor with an expression that was trying to be composed. "Teverin," Strange said. His voice was flat in the way that meant familiarity and history, and none of it good. "You picked the wrong building." The leader, Teverin, looked from Strange to Harry to Hermione and back. He was processing, she could see it, reorganizing his operational picture. He'd come expecting camouflage practitioners, he'd found something else. "The Rift refugees," he said. He had an accent she couldn't place from a language she didn't recognize. His English was precise and slightly formal, the English of someone who'd learned it from a text. "You survived the collapse." "Clearly," Harry said. "You should have come to us," Teverin said. He said it reasonably, which was the most disconcerting delivery for the sentence imaginable. "The Rift signature you carry, it doesn't have to be a liability. We could show you how to use it." "You're about 30 seconds away from not being in any position to offer us anything," Harry said. "So I'd skip the pitch." Teverin's angular face was unreadable. He looked at Harry with the focused attention of someone measuring something. "The Patronus working," he said. "In the pocket dimension yesterday, we detected the membrane resonance from outside the sanctum." He paused. "You've already discovered the locator mechanism." Obviously, Hermione said. Then you understand what it means, Teverin said. He looked at her now and his tone was the same, reasonable, measured. The multiverse has too many streams, dimensional energy is finite. Every redundant branch taxes the whole. What we're doing isn't destruction. It's conservation. You come from a world that understands scarcity. The magical world knows what happens when resources are spread too thin. Our world, Harry said. His voice had changed, not louder, quieter, the kind of quiet that was very much not peace. Our world with 6 billion people in it is on your list. Conservation, that's what you're calling it. Teverin met his eyes. Every stream on the list has equivalents in higher density branches. Nothing is truly lost. The people, the cultures, they exist in stronger streams already. We're simply choosing who gets to live, Hermione said, without asking them on the basis of your own metric of what makes a dimension worth existing. She'd heard this kind of logic before, dressed up in different words. The principle of acceptable sacrifice, the mathematics of necessary evil. She had a specific, bone-deep intolerance for it. You're not conserving anything, you're making yourself the editor of reality. Better than the alternative, Teverin said. Unregulated dimensional expansion will. Strange, Harry said. Strange opened a containment portal underneath Teverin, a classic technique, the same kind Wong had shown them, the floor replaced with a dimensional pocket that had no exit. Teverin dropped and the portal closed and the corridor was quiet. Wong stepped through from the far end, assessed the two contained unravelers and nodded once. The lower-level operatives, he said. Everin is their field commander. Getting him is significant. He talked like someone who believes what he's saying, Hermione said. He does, Strange said. That's what makes him dangerous. He looked at the buckled wall, the hot-running ward architecture, the general evidence of a short, sharp, decisive response to an attack that had been intended to compromise the sanctum. You too, he said, and then paused as if whatever he was going to say required reorganizing. That was adequate. Harry offered. I was going to say impressive, Strange said, with the air of someone who found the word somewhere between accurate and mildly irritating. The ceiling attack, that was good tactical thinking. Pull the anchor point and the whole array collapses, Harry said. Same principle as destabilizing a Death Eater formation. Hit the structure, not the individual. And the ward amplification, Strange said to Hermione. I fed the Sanctum's own energy back through the ward architecture with a different resonance coefficient, she said. It's running at approximately 140% of its previous strength. It might normalize over the next few hours, but I've left a structural modification in the base layer that should. You modified the Sanctum's ward architecture, Strange said. Improved it, I'd say. He stared at her. The cloak of levitation shook out around him, depositing the bundled unraveler on the floor with what might have been dignity, and drifted back to Strange's shoulders with an air of mild self-congratulation. You modified the Sanctum's ward architecture, Strange repeated, in the middle of a fight. It was 4 seconds of work. The structure was obvious once I felt it running. She looked at the wall. You should also repair that before the neighbors notice. Neighbors have been ignoring the Sanctum for decades. There's a large hole in the wall, Wong said. She's right about the wall. Strange looked at the wall. He repaired it with a sling ring gesture, the stones flowing back into place, and then stood looking at Hermione for a moment with the expression she was beginning to recognize as his version of being genuinely impressed and finding it slightly inconvenient. We need to talk to the Ancient One, he said. About Teverin, yes, Wong agreed. About all of it, the attack confirms the timeline is shorter than 4 months. If they're sending field commanders to the Sanctum, Strange moved toward the main corridor. They know you're here, they know the locator mechanism works, and they're not going to sit and wait. Harry was already thinking ahead of that. She could see it in the set of his shoulders. If they come back, he said. When, Wong corrected. When they come back, they'll bring more people, better prepared. Harry looked at the corridor around them, the modified wards, the anchored unraveler, the general aftermath of a fight that had lasted less than 4 minutes. We need to go to them before that happens. Nobody disagreed. The east wing settled around them, wards humming at their new elevated register. Ancient One was in the main study when they found her, and she was already aware. She had the look of someone who had been watching the situation develop in whatever way she watched things develop, the serene attention of someone who processed events through a slightly different temporal lens than everyone else. She listened to Strange's account without interrupting, which meant she was already aware of what he was going to say. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Teverin, she said. Yes. He told them about the rift signature, she said, the Patronus resonance, which means they know exactly what Harry and Hermione can do. She looked at both of them, and that makes you considerably more valuable to them as acquisitions. They won't acquire us, Harry said. She looked at him without challenge or comfort, just looked in the way she had of making the person she was looking at feel precisely measured. No, she said, they won't, but we should understand what we're dealing with. She turned to the window. Teverin is not the Unraveler's leader. He's their operational arm, fieldwork, acquisition, intelligence. Their true leadership stays in the rift space behind the dimensional membranes where conventional sorcery can't reach. She paused. Which means the people who give Teverin his orders are precisely where you two are most capable of going. Hermione looked at Harry. He looked back. The rift space beyond the membrane, she said. The place Strange said we'd need the collapse signature to navigate. Yes, the Ancient One said. We're not ready for that, Strange said, and his voice was careful rather than dismissive, the voice of a man making a precise professional assessment. The internal rift space is not a place you can navigate without extensive. Stephen, the Ancient One said. He stopped. She looked at him with patient certainty. Look at what they did this morning. Look at what they did yesterday. Tell me precisely what preparation they lack that 14 more days of training will provide. Strange's jaw tightened. He looked at Harry and Hermione with the expression of someone doing a very fast and very honest assessment and arriving at an answer he didn't love. The rift space dimensional topology is three-dimensional space plus 4 non-standard axes. Navigation requires. I can feel 2 of the 4 non-standard axes already, Hermione said. Since the pocket dimension work yesterday, the emotional topology and the temporal resonance axis, I've been mapping them since yesterday afternoon. Strange looked at her. You've been mapping the non-standard axes of the rift space in your spare time. I don't have much spare time. I've been mapping them while doing other things. A pause. That's not possible. And yet, she found the relevant notebook page and held it up. The mapping was incomplete. She told him it was in progress, not finished, but the structure was there, the 2 axes plotted against each other with an elegance that she knew from his expression matched work he'd been doing for significantly longer. Strange took the notebook. He read the page, he handed it back, he looked at the Ancient One. She still needs the other 2 axes, he said. I know, the Ancient One said. And she'll need Harry's Patronus resonance to navigate once she has them. Together, she looked between them. Together you have what's needed. Separately, neither of you goes anywhere. We know that, Harry said. She nodded. Good, then there's one more complication to address today. She moved to the desk and sat. The attack this morning will have been observed, not by the Unravelers. By someone else who has been watching the Sanctum considerably more casually than the Unravelers and who will have picked up the unusual magical signatures generated during the fight. She looked at Strange. Your phone has 7 missed calls. Strange checked his device. He looked back at her. Stark, she confirmed. I was going to call him anyway. I know, now he's calling you. She picked up what appeared to be a piece of correspondence. I suggest you answer. Strange stepped into the corridor, already putting the device to his ear. Harry heard him say, I know, yes, I know something happened. Tony, I was going to call you this morning, before the corridor swallowed the rest. Wong stood in the doorway. I'll put on more coffee, he said, in the tone of a man who'd seen Tony Stark arrive at the Sanctum before and understood that preparation was essential. Hermione sat down across from the Ancient One. Harry sat beside her, and for a moment the study was quiet, the aftermath quiet of a space that has just processed something significant and is settling back into its own gravity. On the street outside, a delivery bike rattled past. Pigeons argued on a ledge. New York went entirely on with its day. Teveran's argument, Hermione said to the Ancient One. The Ancient One looked at her. The conservation logic, you've heard it before. Many times, the Ancient One said. The Unravelers have been making that argument in one form or another for 400 years. It's the argument of people who have decided that the complexity of full human and interdimensional moral reality is too inconvenient and replaced it with arithmetic. He believed it, Hermione said. That's what concerned me. He wasn't performing conviction, he had it. That makes him more dangerous, not less, the Ancient One said. And it also means, and this is important, that he's persuadable, not quickly, not easily. But if the Unravelers' leader can be reached through the logic they claim to value, the conservation argument has holes that real mathematics can demolish. She looked at Hermione. I expect you could demolish them. Arithmetically, absolutely. She paused. But that's not how you win a war. No, the Ancient One agreed. But it might be how you end one. Harry had been quiet. Now he said, the other practitioners they've taken, the person from the adjacent stream, the extraction attempt 3 months ago. Are there more taken ones we don't know about? Wong from the doorway. We believe at least 3 others, possibly more. Then when we go into the rift space, Harry said, we're not just going to find the Unraveler leadership. We're going to find people who need to get home. The Ancient One looked at him with a very specific expression, the one she had when something confirmed a thing she'd been thinking for a while. Yes, she said, that's also what you're going into the rift space for. He nodded once. There was nothing more to say about it, it simply was. Tony Stark arrived in 40 minutes. Not in the suit, he came in civilian clothing, which on Stark meant dark clothes that cost more than most people's cars, and an expression of aggressive intelligence wearing the thinnest possible veneer of casual. He came in through the front door because Strange let him through the front door, and he stopped in the entrance of the Sanctum's main reception room and looked at Harry and Hermione with the eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime identifying things that didn't fit expected parameters. So, he said, the 2 anomalies with the impossible magical signatures that lit up every sensor in the tower at, he checked his watch. 6:52 this morning, that's you. Probably, Harry said. British, Stark said. He looked at Hermione, also British. He looked back at Harry. The energy signature from the fight, the initial working, the ceiling destabilization, that was you. The ward amplification was her. He pointed. He was looking at Hermione when he pointed, and something in his expression had shifted from interesting to very interesting in the space of one sentence. The ward amplification. You modified the Sanctum's base ward architecture mid-fight. Yes, Hermione said. Strange has been trying to modify the base ward architecture for 2 years. The structural approach was, she glanced at Strange. Go ahead, Strange said in a tone that suggested he'd be fine. The structural approach was geometrically conservative. The base architecture is built for stability over efficiency. If you shift the resonance coefficient by approximately 15% and use the building's own ambient magical energy as the amplification source rather than an external input, Stark held up one hand. His eyes were doing something specific, the kind of processing she recognized because she did it herself, the rapid integration of new information into an existing model with real-time structural adjustment. You're feeding the ward energy through itself, recursive amplification using the Sanctum's own magical field as the medium. He stared at her. That's a Stark-level solution. Thank you, she said. It wasn't entirely a compliment. Stark-level solutions have a tendency to also create Stark-level problems. He sat down without being invited, in the way of someone who had never needed an invitation to anything and had made peace with that a long time ago. Friday picked up on the magical signature divergence before the fight. The energy you two are carrying, the rift collapse signature, it's not camouflage magic. It's not any magic Friday has a record of. She's been trying to categorize it since you arrived, and I've been watching her fail at it for 4 days, which is genuinely impressive. He paused, one-based, intent and emotionally mediated, extremely high bandwidth. Our world has a different magical tradition, Hermione said. Your world. He processed this, plural dimensions, right? Strange mentioned. He looked at Strange with a particular expression. You could have led with this. You would have come immediately, Strange said. I came immediately anyway. With less information, I needed you to have context. I always have enough context. Stark looked back at Hermione. He was the kind of person who found a person interesting and made it very clear that this was happening, with the unapologetic directness of someone who decided years ago that performing casualness was a waste of good time. The fifth axis work. Strange said you had an emotional topology variable that he's been failing to stabilize for months. She pulled out the notebook without hesitation. This was, she would reflect later, probably the moment it all changed direction, because Stark looked at the page for 45 seconds and then looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on anyone in quite a long time, the expression of someone who has just found an intellectual equal in a direction they didn't anticipate, and said, "You're not accounting for temporal drift in the resonance coefficient." She opened her mouth. The emotional topology is real, he said, but emotion is time variable. The same intent produces different resonance depending on the emotional state of the caster at different temporal positions, so the fifth axis isn't purely emotional, it's emotional temporal, a compound axis. He took the pen she was holding. If you model it as, he started writing in the margin of her notebook. She looked at what he wrote, something crystallized. That's the missing stabilization mechanism, she said. Yeah, that's why the axis keeps drifting in practice. The emotional state of the caster changes during the casting and the model doesn't account for the change. It needs a dynamic variable, he said. Not a fixed emotional input but a responsive one. The math should self-adjust based on real-time emotional resonance, which our magic does naturally, she said, sitting forward. Wand magic self-adjusts continuously. That's why it's harder to teach than your sorcery. It requires continuous emotional authenticity, not fixed states. So the reason your system works where ours fails, Stark said, and he was leaning forward too, pen moving, is that yours was never designed to separate the emotional from the technical. They're the same system, which means the fifth axis doesn't need stabilization. It needs to be left unstable in a controlled way, a living variable, she said. A living variable, he agreed. They looked at each other. The room was quiet. Strange and Harry and Wong were watching them with the specific expressions of people who have just witnessed something that is simultaneously exciting and slightly concerning. Okay, Harry said finally. Give us a moment, Hermione said, already writing. We're in the middle of a moment, Harry. Stark glanced at Harry. She's always like this. Always, Harry said. It's best to let it run. Stark sat back and let it run. He had his own device out within 30 seconds, checking something on it while Hermione worked, and he said without looking up, "The attack this morning, the unravelers. You know about them," Strange said. "Friday found references in the Sanctum database 3 months ago when I was doing the interdimensional sensor upgrade. Ancient One said not to worry about it." He looked at Strange. "She said the same thing to you, I'm guessing." Broadly. "And now they've sent a field commander to the Sanctum." He set down the device, "which means the timeline's moved." "Yes," Strange said. Stark looked at Harry. It was the same kind of look he'd given Hermione, the kind that was actually looking. "The locator mechanism, the Patronus resonance. Strange briefed me on the theory before you arrived." He paused. "It works. 3 apertures located yesterday," Harry said, "clean and precise. And in the fight this morning, I used it to map the Unraveler's microfold anchor points, which is how I knew to take out the ceiling section." Stark was quiet for a second. "In real-time ambient Patronus resonance as a tactical sensor. It's not quite like that, but effectively that's what it is." He looked at Strange. "He's running a magical echolocation system using projected consciousness." "I know," Strange said. "And she's recursively amplifying ward architecture using ambient magical energy as a medium." He looked between them. "And you waited 4 days to tell me." Strange told me not to worry you. I was already worried. Friday flags everything that comes through that rift." Stark stood up, moving the way he always moved, not restless, just continuous, like a person who processes better in motion. He looked at Harry directly. "What do you need?" Harry considered the question. Not what he wanted or what was easiest or what was polite, what was needed. "We need to go into the rift space beyond the membrane," he said. "We need to locate the Unraveler leadership and the practitioners they've taken. We need to map the aperture network before they use it again." He paused. "And we need to do it before they work out what we're capable of and decide the best option is to collapse our dimension now rather than later." Stark nodded. "Timeline. We've got roughly 3 months before their next major extraction event," Strange said. "The attack this morning suggests they know we're developing a counter-strategy. If they accelerate 2 months," Stark said. "My instinct, they try to accelerate, the operational pressure makes them sloppy, they try to move before they're ready rather than give us more prep time." He looked at Harry. "Which means you need to be ready to go in approximately 3 weeks. "I know," Harry said. "Can you be?" Harry looked at Hermione, still writing, pen flying, Stark's margin notes covered by her own responses, and thought about 7 years of being asked to do things that seemed impossible on any reasonable timeline, and the specific way Hermione looked when she was solving the impossible, which was exactly like this. "Yeah," he said, "we can be." Stark looked at him for a moment. "Strange said you're a war veteran." 17 to 19, Harry said, "functionally. Against a dark wizard." "The Dark Wizard, our version of the impossible final boss." He paused. "We won. I heard." Stark's tone was dry. Strange mentioned the death and the resurrection and he gestured vaguely. "The whole deal. It was a complicated year, apparently." Stark was quiet for a moment. "I have some experience with impossible final bosses if you need backup when you go into the rift space." "The suit won't function in the rift space," Strange said. "The dimensional topology disrupts electronics." "The suit won't function conventionally," Stark corrected. "I've been working on a dimensional adapted power system since the first Rift event 3 months ago, which is why you should have told me about them 3 months ago." Strange opened his mouth. "A conversation for later," the Ancient One said from the doorway where she'd appeared silently. Stark pointed at her. "You said not to worry about the Unravelers." "I said not to worry, not that they weren't worth preparing for," she said, which was the kind of distinction that was technically accurate and practically maddening. "The suit modification, how far along?" 60%. "I need about 3 more weeks." "Then you have 3 weeks," she said. She came into the room and sat with the calm of someone who had just received the answer they expected. "What we need now is a plan for what happens when Harry and Hermione enter the rift space. Because they'll go in together, and they'll need a way back out, and the mechanism for that is something we haven't yet solved." "The Patronus resonance could function as a tether," Hermione said. She'd apparently been listening to the entire conversation while simultaneously solving the fifth axis problem. "If I stay on the dimensional membrane side and Harry goes deeper with a connected Patronus working, the stag acts as a thread between us. He navigates, I pull." She looked up. "It requires synchronization we haven't tested yet." "We can test it," Harry said. "In the pocket dimension," Strange said. "Tomorrow." "This afternoon," Harry said. Strange looked at him. "Time," Harry said simply. A pause. Strange nodded. Stark was looking at Hermione again. "The fifth axis solution," he said. She held up the notebook. "Living variable with continuous self-adjustment. The emotional topology is naturally unstable, and that's not a bug, it's the whole mechanism. You need to model it as a dynamic system rather than a static geometry." Stark read it. "This changes the long-range aperture mathematics. Significantly, your portal range should increase by approximately 40% if you recode the sling ring geometry to account for emotional drift." Strange took the notebook. He read the solution. He handed it back. His face was doing the complicated thing it did when he was most impressed and least comfortable about it. "Run it through the Sanctum's practice aperture system," he said. "If the range increase holds." "It'll hold," Hermione said. "You haven't tested it. The mathematics is sound." Strange's mathematics was also sound and it wasn't stable. "Strange's mathematics didn't have the living variable," Stark said. "She's right, it'll hold." He looked at Strange. "Trust the math." "I trust mathematics," Strange said. "I'm less certain about." "About what?" Hermione asked. He looked at her. "About the fact that you've been here 5 days and you've already done 3 things I couldn't do in 3 months of trying." She considered him for a moment, not without sympathy. She understood that particular thing, the experience of encountering someone who moved faster through your own field than you did, who reached the conclusion before you did, who solved the problem you'd been carrying. It was not a comfortable feeling. She'd spent most of school being on the other side of it, knowing how people felt when she was the one arriving at the answer. She'd also occasionally been on this side of it herself, and it was worse than the other one. "My magic," she said carefully, "is built differently from yours. It's not better or worse, it's different tools. The emotional variable that makes the fifth axis work is something I was trained to use from childhood. It's baked in. You were trained out of it because dimensional sorcery requires a kind of emotional discipline that reads as suppression." She paused. "You're not behind. You're trained for precision where I'm trained for resonance. In the rift space, we'll need both." Strange held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "The pocket dimension, an hour." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't quite a thank you. But it was Strange, and she was beginning to understand that Strange's version of warmth came in the form of professional inclusion, and this was exactly what that sounded like. An hour, she agreed. Stark moved toward the door. I'm going back to the lab to finish the suit modification. He paused and looked at Harry. The ceiling section, you read the anchor points of the whole microfold array in real time and took out the structural support. I've had practice reading formations, Harry said. Yeah. Stark nodded. I read Strange's file on you. He said it without further comment, in the tone of a man who'd read enough files that he understood when to leave the reading where it was. Friday will flag me if anything else happens here. She will not, the Ancient One said. Stark looked at her. She will too. She won't be able to, the Ancient One said placidly. I've adjusted the Sanctum's external sensor interface. Stark pointed at her. We are talking about this. We are not, she said. He left. The door closed. The Sanctum settled. Harry looked at the Ancient One. Do you enjoy doing that to him? I enjoy maintaining appropriate information boundaries, she said. Wang, who had been silent for most of the last hour, said she absolutely enjoys doing that to him. The Ancient One looked at Wang. Wang returned to the kitchen with the serenity of a man who had earned the right to say true things. The pocket dimension work that afternoon was different from the previous session, sharper and faster, with the urgency of people who had stopped treating the situation as training and started treating it as preparation. Strange mapped the deeper rift space topology as best he could from the membrane side, and Hermione plotted the 4 non-standard axes on the same framework Stark had helped her build, and Harry tested the Patronus tether idea with a series of incremental workings that pushed the stag progressively deeper into the membrane boundary, while Hermione held the connection from the near side. The tether held. Better than that, it was responsive, self-correcting, the same living variable they'd found in the 5th axis. The Patronus wasn't a static thread. It adjusted continuously to match Harry's depth and Hermione's position, breathing between them like a shared pulse. When he came back from the deepest test, not far into the membrane, the deepest safe reach without full preparation, he found Hermione with her hand pressed to the membrane surface and her eyes closed. The rift collapse signature she carried was resonating at the boundary, and on her face was an expression he'd seen rarely and recognized immediately, the look of someone who has just understood something large. What did you find? He said. She opened her eyes. The other practitioners, she said. The taken ones. She looked at her hand on the membrane. I can feel them, not precisely, not their location, but their presence. The collapse signatures the unravelers imprinted on them when they extracted them. It's faint, but it's there. He was still. How many? At least 5, she said. Possibly more. She looked at him. Harry, they're alive. He let out a breath. Right, he said. Then we go and get them. She looked at him, the same look they'd traded in corridors and libraries and the wrong side of magical disasters for 11 years, and the look said simply and completely, yes, we do. Behind them, Strange was very quietly adding a new element to the rift space map, recalculating the route with the fresh information, and outside the pocket dimension the Sanctum kept its long, patient watch over the city, and New York went on being enormous and indifferent and alive, not knowing what it had in it, not knowing that in a pocket of folded space 3 people and 1 cloak were building the thing that was going to save several realities. It was, all things considered, a good Wednesday. Chapter 4, The Genius, the Billionaire, and the Witch. Stark Tower at 11 in the morning had the energy of a place that never quite stopped being 11 at night. The lab occupied 3 floors of the upper structure, and it ran continuously, not because Stark kept it running, though he did, but because the lab itself seemed to generate momentum, each project pulling the next into motion, each solution opening 3 new problems that were more interesting than the one just solved. Friday managed the operational threads with calm competence, her voice a constant low presence threading through the space, flagging, noting, occasionally disagreeing. Hermione had been here 20 minutes and she already loved it. Not the technology specifically, though the technology was extraordinary, years beyond anything the Ministry's Department of Experimental Charms had produced, and the magical mechanical integration Stark was attempting in the suit modification was the kind of applied genius that made her brain move faster just being near it. She loved the rhythm of the place, the fact that thinking out loud was standard. The fact that when she said something and pointed at the holographic model rotating above the central work table, Stark simply adjusted the model rather than asking her to explain herself. The fact that Friday, 15 minutes in, had started anticipating her requests. Miss Granger, the dimensional topology mapping from the pocket dimension session yesterday, do you want it overlaid on the current rift aperture model? Yes, Hermione said. And flag the emotional temporal resonance points in a different color. Blue, please. The holographic display bloomed new data in blue and she leaned in and found the pattern she'd been looking for since that morning's breakfast reading. The aperture network isn't random, she said. Stark looked up from the suit component he was testing. No, the unraveler apertures aren't distributed by opportunity. They're placed geometrically. She traced the blue points in the air. Look. They're forming a dimensional framework, a structure that spans multiple streams simultaneously, not individual doors, a scaffolding. Stark set down the component. He came to stand beside her and looked at the display, and she felt the shift in him, the same gear change she recognized in herself when something resolved from blurry into clear. A framework, he said. For what? For a directed collapse. She pulled up the 5th axis model they'd rebuilt together and overlaid it. A single-point extraction uses one aperture, but if you build a network of apertures across multiple dimensional streams simultaneously with the right geometric relationship between them, you can collapse all of them at once, Stark said. He said it quietly, which was unusual for him. One operation, multiple targets. The energy from each collapse feeds the next in sequence like a chain reaction. And the practitioners they've taken, Hermione said. They're not each being used for a single collapse, they're the nodes, each one anchored to a point in the framework providing the directed intent for a specific target stream. She looked at him. They're building a weapon with a living grid, the practitioners are the firing mechanism. Stark stared at the model for a moment. How many streams are in the framework? She counted the blue points. 7, possibly 8, this cluster here is ambiguous, she pointed. Our stream is one of them. Others, Friday, Stark said, cross-reference the aperture positions with known dimensional stream data from the Sanctum archive. Cross-referencing, Friday said, 6 of the 7 confirmed positions correspond to dimensional streams with high magical energy density. The 7th is a pause, anomalous. The 7th position doesn't correspond to any stream in the Sanctum's catalogue. Hermione frowned. An uncatalogued stream, or a stream that was recently removed from the catalogue, Stark said. He looked at her. A stream the Unravelers already collapsed. The lab was quiet except for the ambient hum of machines. They've already done one, Hermione said. The 2 small streams the Ancient One mentioned, Stark said. One of them might have been in the framework, not a test run, a calibration. They collapsed it to test the framework geometry. He rubbed the back of his neck, and it was the first time she'd seen him do anything that looked like discomfort. We need to tell Strange and the Ancient One. We will, she said. But first, she pulled the framework model wider, zooming out to see the full geometric structure. The framework has a keystone. Every geometric structure under this kind of dimensional stress requires a central anchor, a point that the whole structure orients around. She moved data points slowly, rotating the model. If we can identify the keystone aperture and destroy it, Stark said, arriving where she was going. The whole framework collapses. She looked at him. Without the practitioners being used as nodes, without collapsing any of the targeted streams, just dismantle the architecture. Stark looked at the model with the expression of someone stress-testing an idea from multiple angles simultaneously. The keystone would be in the rift space, not adjacent to the membrane, deep in. Yes, which means Harry has to reach it. Which means Harry and I have to reach it, she corrected, with the tether working. Stark was quiet for a moment. Then, show me the tether mechanics again. I've been thinking about the power source. She moved to the secondary display. The Patronus works as a tether because it's projected consciousness, he said. I know the theory. What I want to know is whether the tether can be extended without losing coherence. Because the keystone aperture, if it's the central anchor of a 7 or 8 stream framework, is going to be deep, deeper than your pocket dimension practice runs. She considered this honestly. I don't know the coherence limit, she said. We haven't found it yet. You haven't found it yet, he said, or it doesn't exist. She opened her mouth, closed it. I'm not sure those are different things in this case. He smiled, quick and sharp, the smile of someone who had just confirmed a suspicion. The Patronus is pure will and intent, he said. Will doesn't have an inherent range limit, it has an energy limit. Which means the question isn't how far the tether can reach, it's how long Harry can sustain the output before it costs more than he has. He's sustained it for extended periods under extreme stress before, she said. Under what conditions? She thought about the Battle of Hogwarts, the corridor outside the Great Hall, Harry pushing a Patronus against a wave of Dementors with a fever from the Horcrux extraction, and running on no sleep and genuine terror. The stag had burned white and hadn't failed. Conditions significantly worse than this, she said. Good. Stark moved back to the suit component. Because I'm building something that might extend the effective range if it can interface with the Patronus frequency. He held up a small metallic framework, roughly circular. Sling ring architecture reworked. Instead of generating its own dimensional resonance, it amplifies an existing resonance signal. If I can key it to the Patronus frequency, it would boost the tether, she said. Extend the effective reach without increasing Harry's output load. Working theory needs testing. He set it down, and I need the Patronus frequency data. I have it, she said. She found the relevant notebook page. She'd been taking frequency readings since the pocket dimension work, careful measurements of the resonance signature the stag produced at different depths of the membrane. Here. He took the notebook, read it, and looked at her. You carry a notebook everywhere. Of course, old school, it works. He handed it back. Friday, start the frequency modeling based on the data on page. He looked at the page. Whatever page that is. 43, Hermione said. 43, he confirmed. Match it to the amplifier architecture and project a range extension estimate. Running the model, Friday said. They worked for 2 hours without stopping, which was the longest Hermione had gone without checking on Harry since they'd arrived, and she was distantly aware of this while simultaneously being unable to stop what she was doing, because what she was doing was important and fascinating and necessary, and she was genuinely enjoying herself in a way she hadn't in a professional context since approximately her 5th year, before the war had swallowed everything else. The lab had food somewhere. Stark pointed at a cabinet without looking up from his work at some point, and she found it and ate something she couldn't have named and kept working. Friday quietly made sure her tea was refreshed at intervals, which she noticed only in retrospect. At the 2-hour mark, Stark said, "Friday, what's the range projection?" The amplifier array, key to the Patronus frequency data, extends effective tether coherence range by approximately 260%, Friday said, with the caveat that the Patronus frequency data is a sample from membrane-adjacent depths. Deeper rift space may produce frequency drift that the current model doesn't account for. Managed by the living variable, Hermione said. The living variable in the fifth axis, Stark said, working it through. The self-adjusting resonance. If the amplifier is built to respond to frequency drift the same way the fifth axis math responds to emotional drift, it tracks with him as he goes deeper, she said. Yes, the amplifier needs to be a dynamic system. Everything's a dynamic system when you're involved, Stark said. He didn't say it as a complaint, and it wasn't one. He said it with the appreciation of a man who'd spent a long time working in systems that didn't respond well to static models and had finally found someone who understood why. I'll take that as a compliment. It was. She smiled at the model. It occurred to her that she'd been smiling on and off for 2 hours and that this hadn't been an accident. She filed it as relevant data about the state she was in. The door to the lab opened. Harry came in without knocking. The Friday system had apparently learned to let him through, which Hermione suspected Friday had decided on autonomously rather than being instructed. He was wearing the same clothes he'd worn for training that morning, and there was a faint residual shimmer in the air around him that meant he'd been doing serious spell work, the kind that left traces on the caster the way a long run left sweat. At the holographic display, the aperture framework in blue and white, the emotional topology overlaid, the amplifier architecture Stark had been building, and then at Hermione and then at Stark. "How long have you two been at it?" he said. 2 hours, she said. 2.5, Friday said. "Friday doesn't count time I spend eating," Hermione said. "I count all time," Friday said. Harry looked at Stark. "She's been doing this her whole life," he said. "Loses time when she's working." "Completely gone. I don't lose time," Hermione said. "I reallocate attention. You didn't eat lunch at Hogwarts for 3 years because you kept forgetting it was lunch. I remembered lunch. I chose to prioritize the library. Until I started bringing sandwiches." She looked at him. He was smiling, the real one, the easy one that he'd apparently rediscovered somewhere in the last week in this building, and she felt the warm, complicated thing again, rising in her chest, and she looked away at the display because the display was safer. "Come look at this," she said. "We've found something." He came to stand beside her. He was warm from the training, and the trace shimmer of spellwork faded slowly as he stood still and looked at the model. She walked him through the framework discovery, the geometric structure, the keystone theory, the 7 targeted streams, and he listened with the focused quiet he always had when something mattered, asking one specific question at the end. "How many of the 7 have living practitioners anchored to them, based on what you felt in the pocket dimension?" Stark said. "How many signatures?" 5 definite, Harry said. 2 uncertain. He looked at the framework model. 5 at minimum. "We need to get them out before we go for the keystone. Getting them out changes the framework stability," Hermione said. "Remove a node and the geometry shifts, the whole thing may become unstable." "Good," Harry said. "Not entirely good," she said. "An unstable dimensional framework under this kind of stress could collapse unpredictably. If the unravelers see it destabilizing, they'll try to collapse the remaining targets manually before the framework fails." "Then we need to remove the practitioners and hit the keystone fast," Harry said. He looked at Stark. "How fast can you have the amplifier ready?" 2 weeks, Stark said. "Maybe 10 days if it comes together clean." Harry nodded. He turned back to the display and studied the keystone position, the geometric center of the framework buried deep in the rift space. "And our entry point, the membrane aperture we located with the Patronus," Hermione said. "The nearest and most recently used one, that's our door." He studied it. She watched him work through the tactical picture with the instinctive military-adjacent clarity he'd developed through years of planning operations with imperfect information and limited time. He didn't need a map to see the shape of a plan. He'd never needed a map. "We'll need Strange with us on the membrane side," he said, "and Wung for the exit portal when we come back out. If the framework collapses around the keystone, we need the exit ready before we go for it, not after." "Agreed," Hermione said. "I want the suit ready too," Stark said. "Not inside. I'll maintain position on the membrane surface, but I want to be there." Harry looked at him, not the look he'd given Strange that one had been assessment. This one was something simpler. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." Stark nodded. He didn't make anything of it, which was the right response. Harry didn't like fuss around the moments that mattered. The door opened again. Strange walked in without knocking, which told Hermione that he and Stark had developed a mutual open-door policy at some point in their working relationship that neither of them had explicitly acknowledged but both adhered to. He was holding his phone and looked like someone who had just received information and was deciding how to deliver it. "Something happened," he said. Everyone looked at him. "The Sanctum received a visitor 20 minutes ago," Strange said. "Not an attack, a visitor came through a side-channel dimensional fold very precisely, specifically designed not to trigger the wards." He looked around the room. "He's waiting in the east study." "He," Hermione said. "Loki," Strange said. He paused. Odinson, Asgardian, god of mischief, currently holding approximately 4 pieces of information we need and making his willingness to share them a matter of active negotiation. Silence. Stark put down the suit component very carefully. Loki, he said, yes, is in the sanctum. Yes, and you left him there. The Ancient One is with him, Strange said. She seemed, he appeared to be searching for a word, amused. Stark picked up his jacket. Of course she did. He looked at Harry and Hermione. Loki is the alien invasion, Harry said. You mentioned one, he was involved. He caused it, Stark said. Long story, complicated situation. It's not simple. He's not exactly an enemy anymore, but calling him an ally requires more generosity than I can usually manage without a drink. He moved toward the door. Coming. Harry looked at Hermione. She was already closing her notebook. The East Study had been one of the rooms Hermione had spent the most time in. It had the best lamp for reading in the late afternoon, and one could develop the habit of leaving tea there at 4 o'clock without being asked. Now it looked different in the same way a familiar room looks different when it contains someone who doesn't belong in it. The usual comfortable weight of the space shifted and charged. Loki stood at the window. He was tall, with the kind of physical presence that went beyond size, a quality of attention, as if the air around him was slightly more aware than air elsewhere. His clothes were Asgardian in a loose sense, expensive in any sense, and he held himself with the precise, deliberate grace of someone who had learned to weaponize the appearance of perfect ease. He turned when they came in with the relaxed timing of someone who had known they were coming and chosen not to show it. His eyes moved to Harry and Hermione immediately, not to Strange or Stark, to them. He assessed them in the instant and unhurried way of someone whose assessment had centuries of data behind it, and something in his expression shifted, not surprise, something more like recognition. Well, he said, his voice was low and pleasant and contained multitudes of things that didn't show on the surface. The Riftwalkers, I wondered when I'd get to meet you. You knew we were here, Hermione said, not a question. I've been aware of the Sanctum situation for considerably longer than anyone here would prefer, Loki said. The Unraveler's dimensional network creates interference that anyone with sufficient sensitivity to rift space can detect. And I am, a slight pause, performed modestly, somewhat sensitive. Why are you here? Harry said. He said it without hostility or ceremony, the same way he asked everyone everything, directly, interested in the actual answer. Loki looked at him for a moment with an expression that was re-evaluating something. I expected that question to be asked by him, he said, nodding at Strange. I'm asking it, Harry said. So you are. Loki turned from the window. He moved through the room with the particular quality of someone who had spent millennia in spaces that weren't theirs and had learned to occupy them anyway. I'm here because the Unravelers have something of mine. The Ancient One sat in her chair. She'd apparently been in the room all along, in the way she sometimes was, and said, What do they have? Loki looked at her. It was a different look than he'd given anyone else. There was something in it that might have been in the deepest layers respect. Information, he said. Specifically, the location of an Asgardian dimensional artifact that was lost during the convergence 3 years ago. The Unravelers have it. It's one of the reasons their framework is structurally stable. The artifact's resonance is acting as a secondary anchor for their keystone aperture. Hermione's eyes went to Harry. He was looking at her. The same thought. The keystone isn't just a dimensional aperture, it has a physical anchor. What's the artifact? Strange asked. A recording, Loki said. A dimensional map, millennia old. It charts the structure of the original multiverse before certain events changed it. He paused. It contains information about dimensional streams that no longer exist, and in the wrong hands, it's a blueprint for how to eliminate streams that do. The Unravelers are using it as a guide, Hermione said. They're not choosing targets arbitrarily. They're restoring a previous configuration of the multiverse. Loki pointed at her with the expression of someone who had just found the quickest mind in the room and was pleased about it. Precisely. Someone a very long time ago made choices about which dimensional streams would persist and which would be collapsed. The Unravelers believe those choices were correct and that the current state of the multiverse is a deviation from an intended design. He sat down, a fluid, unannounced motion, in the best chair in the room, which Hermione noted was always the chair Loki chose in every depiction of him she'd encountered. They're not radicals, they're restorationists. That doesn't make them right, Harry said. No, Loki agreed easily, but it makes them coherent, and coherent people are considerably more difficult to stop than fanatics because coherent people can be shown they're wrong. He looked at Harry with something that was close to not warmth but interest of a very particular kind, though they rarely enjoy it. The artifact, Strange said. Where is it? In the rift space, Loki said. Adjacent to the keystone aperture, which is why I'm here. He looked around the room. The sorcerers of Camotage cannot access the deep rift space. The Avengers' conventional capabilities are insufficient, but 2 individuals carrying raw rift collapse signatures. He looked at Harry and Hermione. 2 individuals who can navigate the rift space by feel rather than by map. He paused. Could retrieve it and give it to you, Stark said flatly. Return it to Asgard, Loki said, where it belongs. Where it can't be used as a blueprint for anything. Why should we trust you? Stark asked. Loki looked at him. You shouldn't, he said pleasantly. By default, I'd be concerned if you did. He opened his hands, a gesture of display rather than concession. But my interests and yours align precisely enough on this specific matter that my motivations are irrelevant. I want the artifact back. You want the keystone destroyed. The artifact is the keystone's secondary anchor. Remove the artifact and the keystone is destabilized. Destroy the destabilized keystone. The whole framework collapses, Hermione said. Safely, the geometric stress is released through the keystone rather than cascading to the target streams. Yes, Loki looked at her. You worked that out quickly. I had most of it already, she said. The artifact changes the mechanism but not the destination. Indeed. Looked at her with the full weight of whatever centuries of experience went into his assessments. You're more interesting than I expected, he said, not flirtatiously, as a declaration of fact delivered with the same matter-of-factness he might use to note the weather. Both of you, he glanced at Harry. I've been watching the Sanctum's operation for 3 months. I've seen strange work, Wung work, the Ancient One think 4 moves ahead of everyone in the room. I haven't seen what you two do. He paused. I'd like to. You might see it when we go into the rift space, Harry said. That's what I'm counting on. He stood smooth and easy. I'll tell you what I know about the artifact's position, its resonance signature, its approximate location relative to the keystone aperture. In return, when you retrieve it, you bring it out and give it to me. And if we decide not to, Harry said. Loki looked at him. The expression was complicated, not threatening. Something more like consideration. Then you don't have the artifact's resonance signature and your keystone approach is more dangerous. He shrugged. I'd prefer the trade, but I won't compel it. I'm extending a negotiation in good faith, which is a slight pause with what might have been self-awareness in it. Not my most natural posture. I'd appreciate it being acknowledged. The Ancient One from her chair. It's acknowledged, Loki. He looked at her. The expression he gave her was, briefly, different from all the others. Older, more honest. He nodded once. Strange looked at Stark. Stark looked at Harry. Harry looked at Hermione. She met his eyes and the 2-second conversation happened. He's not lying about the artifact. The framework mechanics confirm what he's describing. The trade is reasonable. His motivations being self-interested doesn't make the information wrong. He knows more than he's told us. Obviously. That's not necessarily a problem right now. I'll get him to tell us more. She looked at Loki. The other practitioners, she said. The ones the unravelers have taken, you know where they are. Loki was still for a moment, not long enough to mean evasion, long enough to mean genuine consideration. I have approximate locations, he said. That's part of the trade, she said. The artifact information and the practitioner locations, both. He looked at her. You're adding conditions after the initial. I'm identifying information you already have and adding it to a trade that benefits you more than it benefits us, she said. You need us to go into the rift space. We don't need you for that. It's useful but not essential. The practitioner locations make the trade worth our time. Loki was quiet. Then slowly he smiled. It was a different smile than the polished ones he'd been distributing around the room, slightly less manufactured. You remind me of someone I used to know, he said. I'll take that however I need to, she said. He laughed. It was short and genuine and slightly surprised, as if he'd been caught off guard by it. Very well, he said. The artifact and the practitioner locations for the artifact's safe passage to Asgard. Agreed, she said. Strange looked at her. She felt his look without turning her head. She heard what it meant. You just negotiated with the god of mischief in under 3 minutes. She filed it. Loki produced a small object from somewhere inside his clothing, a coin-sized disc of something that looked like compressed light, and held it out to her. The artifact's resonance signature, he said. Hold it in your dominant hand and you'll feel the frequency. Your rift collapse sensitivity should be sufficient to track it once you're in the rift space. She took it. The frequency hit her immediately, not painful, not overwhelming, but present, a specific note in a register she was learning to read. She focused on it for a moment, mapped it, filed it. The practitioners, she said. I'll need a map of the framework you've built, he said. Harry moved to the display. They'd transferred the holographic model to the Sanctum's own system before leaving the tower, and it was available through the study's projection interface. He brought it up with the casualness of someone who'd been using the system for a week and a half. Loki looked at the model for a long moment. He reached out and touched 3 points on the geometric structure, his hand passing through the holographic projection with the focused precision of someone who recognized the architecture. Here, he paused. And here, those are the confirmed practitioner positions. The other signatures you detected, I believe they're here and here, but those are less certain. He stepped back, 5 confirmed, 2 probable. Hermione was already mapping them against the framework nodes. They matched. Every confirmed position corresponded to a node in the geometric structure exactly as she'd predicted. They're each anchored to a node, she said, which means releasing them disrupts the node which destabilizes the framework. In sequence, Loki said, not simultaneously. Release them in sequence from the outermost node inward and the framework destabilizes gradually. Simultaneously, the whole thing shocks at once, Harry said. Too fast. Yes, sequence inward ending at the keystone. Loki looked at Harry. The keystone will be the most defended. The Unraveler leadership will be positioned there. How many? Harry asked. 3 at minimum, Loki said. Possibly 5. Their strongest practitioners, the ones whose dimensional working is most precise. He paused. They'll know you're coming. The framework will tell them the moment you enter the rift space, you'll disturb the membrane resonance. So we're fast, Harry said. Not subtle. Can you be fast? Harry looked at him with the expression of someone who had run from auras through the Ministry of Magic at 17, fought his way out of Gringotts on a dragon, and once done a round trip to the Department of Mysteries and back in a single night as a 15-year-old. Yeah, he said, we can be fast. Loki looked at him, and something in the Asgardian's ancient, complicated eyes said, I believe you. Stark, who had been watching the entire exchange with the alert attention of a man taking notes in his head, said, the sequence approach changes the timeline. Yes, Hermione said, we can't just go for the keystone. We free the practitioners in sequence on the way in, then destroy the keystone on the way out. She looked at Harry. The tether has to hold through all of it. It'll hold, he said. Harry, it'll hold, he said again simply. She heard what was underneath it. Not bravado, certainty of a specific kind, the kind that came from knowing what you were capable of rather than hoping you were. She'd trusted that certainty before in the dark of a cave while a man with 7 split souls tried to end everything, and it had been correct. She trusted it now. Strange had been quiet for longer than was comfortable. She turned to find him looking at the framework model with an expression she hadn't seen from him before, not the calculating assessment, not the reluctant impression, not the professional competition, something more personal. The practitioners they've taken, he said. 5 confirmed, possibly 7. He looked at the model. One of the confirmed positions, he stopped, started again. One of the signatures in the framework, it's a camotage signature. The room went quiet. One of your people, Wang said from the doorway where he'd appeared at some point with the quiet materialization of a man for whom presence was a matter of choice. A former student, Strange said. He said it with the flat precision of someone controlling something. She left camotage 8 months ago. We assumed she'd returned home. A pause. She didn't. Nobody said anything for a moment. Harry looked at Strange. We'll bring her out, he said, not we'll try or if we can. He said it as a statement of what would happen. She's one of the 5. We bring all 5. Strange met his eyes. Something passed between them that wasn't quite friendship but was its own real thing, built over 10 days of shared urgency and reluctant respect. He nodded. I know, he said. Loki watched this exchange with the expression of someone who'd seen many things and had stopped being surprised by most of them, but was occasionally, briefly, still capable of something like being moved. He covered it with the ease of long practice, turning back to the model. There's one more thing, he said. Of course there is, Stark said. The Unraveler leader, Loki said. The one who designed the framework. You know Teverin, he's their operational arm, but the leader, the architect, he paused. Her name is Myra. She was a student of the Ancient Ones approximately 200 years ago. The Ancient One, who had been serenely silent, said nothing. Everyone else looked at her. 240 years ago, she said, give or take. You knew, Strange said. I suspected, she said. I've known it was someone with my training. The framework geometry has specific fingerprints, the emotional topology approach, the living variable. She looked at Hermione. It was one of my innovations, from the period when I was exploring the magical tradition Hermione represents, the crossover between intent-based systems and dimensional sorcery. She was quiet for a moment. Myra was my most exceptional student. She left after a disagreement about the ethics of dimensional manipulation. The serenity in her voice was a specific kind, the kind that covered something very old. I didn't know what she'd done with the argument she left with. Now you do, Harry said gently. Now I do. She looked at Harry and Hermione. This changes the Keystone encounter. Myra won't simply defend the Keystone. She'll know who you are, what you can do, and she'll have built defenses that account for both your magical systems. She spent decades studying the crossover between intent-based and sorcery-based magic. Her eyes went to Hermione. She's the reason I knew what to look for when you arrived. She invented the theory, Hermione said. She began it, the Ancient One said. You've already gone further in 10 days than she did in 10 years, because you're not theorizing, you're living it. She stood. Which matters, because when you meet her in the rift space, the theoretical advantage is hers. The applied advantage is ours, Harry said. She nodded. Loki looked between the Ancient One and Harry and Hermione with something on his face that was close to the expression he'd worn when he'd laughed, the one that was slightly too honest for his usual presentation. This, he said, is going to be very interesting. You're not coming, Stark said. I'm absolutely coming, Loki said. You're not coming into the rift space? Certainly not, but I'll be on the membrane side. He looked at Stark. Think of me as moral support. I'd rather not think of you at all. And yet here we are. Harry, who had been listening and watching and running calculations in his head, said 10 days. Everyone looked at him. 10 days to prepare Stark's amplifier, the tether practice, the practitioner sequence. We go in 10 days. He looked at Strange. Can we be ready in 10 days? Strange looked at the framework model. At Hermione, at his own hands, the scars on his knuckles visible, his fingers that had learned impossible things because the alternative was worse. Yes, he said. Hermione, Harry said. She had the resonance disc in her hand. She could feel the artifact's frequency, the thread of it, the direction like a star bearing. She had the framework mapped. She had the fifth axis model. She had the tether. She had Harry. 10 days, she said. Obviously. He smiled. The room exhaled. They stayed in the study for another 2 hours, Loki and Strange producing maps and arguments at approximately equal rates, Stark building something small and metallic while simultaneously contributing to 3 different conversations, Wang providing tea and occasional sentences that landed with the weight of paragraphs, the Ancient One watching the shape of the whole thing with the expression of someone reading a story she'd known the beginning of but not the middle. Hermione sat with her notebook and built the sequence plan, outermost practitioner to innermost, node by node, the destabilization wave moving inward toward the keystone in the controlled collapse that would end the framework without cascading to the targeted streams. She built it with the precision she'd always brought to the things that mattered and the specific knowledge she'd built in the last 10 days in this building in this world. Harry sat beside her. Not working, just present, his arm along the back of the settee behind her in the way he had of being close without demanding acknowledgement, the way he'd sat beside her through library sessions and planning sessions and the long watches of terrible nights for years. At one point she stopped writing and said, without planning to, "I don't want to go back." He looked at her, to our world, to the ministry, to the classified work and the committees and the 18-month fight to get anything done. She looked at her notebook, at the framework plan, at all of it. "I want to do this kind of problem, this scale." "We will," he said, "once this is done." "How? I don't know yet." He said it honestly. "But we're not going back to what it was, we've been somewhere better, that changes things." She looked at him, actually looked, in the way she sometimes caught herself doing when she'd stopped being careful about it. He was 22 years old and looked it, and also didn't, in the complicated way of people who had seen things that left a permanent layer underneath the surface. He'd been sitting next to her for 11 years, and she'd been working up to something for approximately the last 18 months of those 11 years, and the edge of it was closer right now than it had ever been, and she was thinking about it honestly for the first time instead of filing it for later. "Harry," she said. He was already looking at her, he'd been looking at her. "Yeah," he said quietly with the tone of someone who was also working up to something and was also thinking about it honestly. And then Loki said from across the room, "If you two are going to have a moment, I suggest doing it somewhere that doesn't have 5 other people in it." Harry looked at him. "Thank you, Loki. You're welcome." He was examining one of the Sanctum's artifacts with apparent casual interest and hadn't looked up. Stark said, "Was that?" "Don't," Strange said. "I'm just saying don't." Hermione looked back at her notebook, but she was smiling and so was Harry, and the edge of the thing between them was still there, still close, waiting with the patient certainty of something that had already decided to happen and was simply allowing for the appropriate moment. 10 days, she thought. Survive the rift space, destroy the keystone, bring everyone home, then the moment. It could wait 10 days, probably. Chapter 5, Dimensional Fugitives. The 10 days passed the way the days before significant things always passed. Too fast in the aggregate, and unbearably slow in individual hours. The long stretches of preparation interrupted by moments that moved at double speed and left marks. Day 3, Harry discovered he could extend the Patronus into the membrane boundary while simultaneously maintaining a full combat casting stance, which meant the tether and his offensive capacity weren't mutually exclusive. He'd been worried about that. He stopped being worried about it when the stag blazed at full strength, while he fired 3 consecutive reducto variations at Strange's conjured targets, without the tether dropping a single frequency register. Strange had watched from the membrane side of the pocket dimension and not said anything for a long moment after. Day 5, Hermione finished the 5th axis rework of the long-range aperture mathematics, ran it through the Sanctum's practice aperture system, and the range extension held at 43% beyond Strange's previous maximum, not the 40% she'd projected, 43. She'd been annoyed about the 3% overage for approximately 20 minutes because she'd modeled 40 and wanted precision, before Strange pointed out that a result exceeding projection was not, by any reasonable standard, a problem. "It's not about exceeding projection," she'd said. "It's about the model being accurate." "The model was accurate," Strange said. "The system performed better than the model predicted. The system, not the model, is the variable. The model should account for the variable. The model is 10 days old and you built it from scratch with a partial dataset." She'd opened her mouth. "Granger," he'd said with the flat precision of someone who had fought this exact argument inside his own head for years. "Take the win." She'd taken the win, 43%. Day 7, Stark finished the amplifier and they tested it in the pocket dimension with Harry pushing the Patronus to its previous maximum depth and then passed it. The stag went 4 times deeper than any previous test run. It blazed through membrane layers Harry hadn't been able to reach before, and Hermione on the near side felt the tether running strong and clear without any of the tremor that had appeared at previous depth limits. When Harry came back, he sat on the floor of the pocket dimension for a moment with his hands on his knees and his eyes slightly unfocused, and she crouched in front of him and he said, "It's extraordinary in there," in a voice that was quiet with something other than exhaustion. "What does it look like?" she asked. "Like every possibility that ever existed all at once," he said, "like standing in a library the size of everything." He looked at her. "You need to come in with me. Not just to the membrane boundary, all the way." "I will be," she said. "No, I mean," he stopped. "It's worth seeing is what I mean, beyond the mission." He paused. "It's worth seeing for itself." She looked at him for a moment. "All right," she said. Day 9, the Ancient One called them all into the main study. Strange, Wong, Harry, Hermione, Stark, and Loki, who had installed himself in the sanctum with the comfortable permanence of someone who had decided he lived there now and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. She laid out the operational picture without ceremony or preamble, which was the only way she ever laid out anything. "Tomorrow," she said. The framework's next activation window, the Unraveler's operational rhythm, suggests they run their next extraction attempt within the next 48 hours. We go before they do. Nobody argued. The room had the particular quality of a space full of people who had done the preparation and arrived at the point where further preparation was just delay, wearing the mask of caution. After the meeting broke, after Stark went back to the tower for a final systems check and Strange went to run one more pocket dimension calibration, and Wong went to make preparations for the exit portal, Harry and Hermione ended up in the library. Not deliberately, they'd both simply walked there in the way they always walked there, drawn by the same gravity. The late evening light came through the tall windows in long gold bars, and the books did their gentle, shifting, semi-sentient thing on the shelves, and the room had the quality of a space that had been used for serious thinking for a very long time and had absorbed the habit. Harry sat on the floor with his back against the settee, which was where he'd been sitting for most of the last 10 days. Hermione sat on the settee above him, which was where she'd been sitting. It was a configuration that had arrived without discussion and stayed because it worked, his presence grounding her tendency to spiral into abstraction, her thinking giving him something to anchor his instincts to. She had her notebook, but she wasn't writing in it. She was looking at the framework plan, not reading it. She'd read it until she could reproduce it from memory, just holding it. "Are you nervous?" he asked. She thought about being honest versus being accurate and decided they were the same thing. "No," she said, "not nervous, it's more," she tried to find the right word, "aware, very aware of exactly what tomorrow is." "Yeah," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not nervous either. I know I probably should be." "You're never nervous before things," she said. "You're nervous after, when it's over and you have time to think about what could have gone wrong." He looked up at her. "You've noticed that?" "I've known you for 11 years, Harry." He looked back at the room. "The things that could go wrong tomorrow are extensive," she said. "I've catalogued them." "Of course you have. The framework destabilizes faster than the sequence plan allows. The Unraveler leadership at the Keystone is larger than 5. Myra's defenses are built specifically against our magical systems. The tether drifts under the pressure of the deeper rift space. The artifact's resonance interferes with the Patronus frequency. The practitioners are in worse condition than." She stopped. "I've catalogued them," she said again, "and I've built contingencies for all of them except possibly the last one because I don't know what condition the taken practitioners are in and I can't model something I don't have data for." "We'll adapt," he said. "I know. We're very good at adapting." "I know that too." He looked up at her again. The library was quiet, and the light was getting lower, and they'd been in this building for 10 days and it felt like much longer in the way that time operated differently when things were happening. She was aware of him in the way she was always aware of him, only more so in the late light with tomorrow sitting in the room between them. "Hermione," he said. She looked down at him. He was looking up at her with the particular expression she'd been increasingly unable to categorize over the last 2 weeks, the one that wasn't the comfortable, familiar look of 11 years of friendship. It was the other one, the one that had been growing behind the familiar look with the patient certainty of something that had decided it was going to exist whether or not anyone acknowledged it. "After tomorrow," he said. He stopped. "After tomorrow," she said, carefully. "I want to." He stopped again. He was not a man who stumbled over words often. He was direct, usually the way he was about everything, but he was stumbling now and she found she didn't want to help him along. She wanted to hear what he found on his own. Over the last 10 days I've been thinking about." The door opened. They both looked at it with the specific expression of two people interrupted at a precise and inconvenient moment. Loki stood in the doorway. He looked at them. He looked at the door. He looked back at them with an expression of genuine, unperformed apology that was so unexpected from him that neither of them knew what to do with it. "I need the framework map," he said. "There's something I want to check before tomorrow." Harry looked at Hermione. She looked at Harry. She held out the notebook. "Page 47, she said. Loki took it. He looked at it. He looked at them. "I'll return this immediately." "It's fine," Harry said in a tone that suggested it was not entirely fine but that he had decided to be gracious about it. Loki left. The door closed. The moment had passed in the specific way moments passed when interrupted, not gone but moved, reset to a slightly different position like a chess piece returned to the board a square away from where it had been. Hermione looked at the window. Harry looked at his hands. The library settled. "After tomorrow," she said. He looked up. "Finish the sentence, after tomorrow," she said. "Not because I don't want to hear it now." She met his eyes directly. "But because after tomorrow we'll be past the thing that's been holding both of us slightly off balance for 10 days and I think whatever you're going to say and whatever I'm going to say in response should happen when we're both." She paused. "Settled." He looked at her for a moment. Then slowly, "Yeah," he said. "Okay." She picked up a book from the side table and opened it, not because she was going to read it, but because it gave her hands something to do. He leaned his head back against the settee, eyes on the ceiling. The library kept its old, thinking quiet around them. "Hermione," he said without moving. "What? We are very settled people," he said. Objectively, she turned a page, extraordinarily settled, remarkably calm given the circumstances, the picture of equanimity. He made a sound that was close to a laugh. She smiled at the page she wasn't reading. Outside the library window, New York moved through its nighttime rhythms, and the Sanctum held its old breath, and tomorrow waited with its enormous specific weight. She slept well, which surprised her. She'd expected the shallow, fractured sleep of the night before something important, but she went out quickly and woke clean, which she chose to interpret as her nervous system making a correct assessment of the situation. Harry was already up when she came downstairs. He was on the roof, she knew without checking, because she'd learned the rhythm of him in this building the way you learned the rhythm of someone when you lived in close proximity to them for 10 days of high intensity. He went to the roof in the mornings. She went to the library. Then they found each other in the kitchen. She went to the kitchen and there was coffee and there was Wang, already suited for whatever role he was playing today. Exit portal preparation, the Ancient One had said, which meant he'd be on the membrane boundary with Strange waiting for them to come back through. He nodded at her with the warm brevity of a man who communicated entirely in economy of expression and managed to be entirely clear anyway. Ready, he said. Yes, she said. Good, he said, and gave her coffee. Harry came down from the roof when she was on her second cup. He was wearing the same thing he'd worn for every training session, practical, dark, nothing extraneous. His wand was at his belt and he had Stark's amplifier on his right hand, the modified sling ring architecture configured to his grip over the past 3 days of calibration. He looked at her and she looked at him, and it was the before something look, the one they'd traded outside an impossible door many times, and it was steady and clear and real. Ready, she said. Yeah, he said. He took a cup of coffee from Wang. They stood in the kitchen and drank coffee and didn't say anything that needed to be said because the things that needed to be said were either already known or were scheduled for after. Strange arrived at 7:30. Stark arrived at 7:40 in civilian clothes with a modified case that contained the suit in its compressed form and an expression of controlled anticipation. Loki materialized at 7:52 from somewhere unspecified and was immediately given tea by Wang, which suggested a level of domestic familiarity that nobody commented on. The Ancient One came last. She stood in the center of the main hall and looked at the assembled group, Strange with the cloak active, Wang with 2 sling rings spinning slowly, Stark in the process of suiting up with the particular efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times, Loki standing slightly apart with the studied ease of someone who was more invested than they were showing, Harry and Hermione side by side with wands out and the amplifier running. The sequence, she said, it wasn't a question. He was running through it with them one more time because once was never enough. Outermost practitioner first, Hermione said. Free them in sequence, moving inward. 5 confirmed, 2 probable. After the 5th confirmed release, the framework will be destabilized enough that the keystone is accessible. We go for the keystone, retrieve the artifact simultaneously, destroy the keystone. She paused. The framework collapses from the center outward. The target streams are released without direct collapse. The practitioners exit with us through the tether anchor portal. And Myra, the Ancient One said. Everyone was quiet. She's a person who made a wrong choice a very long time ago, the Ancient One said. That doesn't make her irredeemable. If the opportunity exists, we're not going to hurt her unless we have to, Harry said, not defensively, as information. The Ancient One nodded. But we're not going to be gentle if she makes it necessary, he added. I know, she said. She looked at him with the expression she'd had in their first conversation, the one that was measuring something she'd already measured but confirmed. I'd expect nothing less. Strange opened the aperture portal to the pocket dimension, not the practice version, the genuine one, the full membrane boundary access. It blazed orange and enormous in the center of the hall, and the rift space energy hit immediately, that deep resonant pull that Hermione had been feeling for 10 days, and that now felt like a frequency she'd always known. She looked at Harry, he looked at her. Together, he said. Together, she said, they went through. The membrane boundary was different at full entry versus practice runs, the difference between wading and diving, the pressure of it immediate and total, the dimensional topology pressing in from all non-standard axes simultaneously. Hermione felt it and let it run through her without resisting it, the way she'd learned to feel the rift space energy rather than fight it. Beside her, Harry was already pulling the Patronus up, the stag blazing into the membrane space and immediately, brilliantly, illuminating the framework architecture around them. It was vast. The framework from inside the rift space rather than on a holographic model she was going to use the word enormous, and it wasn't going to be adequate, but it was what she had. 7 arms of geometric fire extending into the deeper rift space, each one anchored at a node that pulsed with the trapped energy of the practitioners bound to it. The emotional resonance of those nodes was heartbreaking in the specific way of things that were caged, not defeated, not extinguished, but constrained, burning against the limits of their confinement. I feel them, Harry said. Yes, she felt them too, outermost first. She turned, reading the framework geometry against the sequence plan she'd memorized. Their northeast arm, that's the farthest node. Harry moved the stag. It blazed through the rift space with the specific silver certainty of a Patronus following intent, and she moved beside it, tracking the tether with one hand and the framework geometry with her wand in the other. The amplifier on Harry's hand threw the resonance in broad pulses, and she felt the frequency even and strong, no drift, no tremor, the living variable self-adjusting as the depth increased. The first node was a woman. She was suspended in the framework geometry, not physically but magically, her consciousness tethered to the node while her body was presumably somewhere in the deeper rift space. What Hermione could feel was the signature of her, a different magical system, something Eastern European in its architecture, precise and formal, and underneath the precision the particular quality of someone who had been maintaining themselves under tremendous pressure for an unknown amount of time with the stubborn refusal to simply give. "Hold on," Hermione said to the signature. She didn't know if it could hear her, she said it anyway. "We're going to get you out." The node was anchored with the unraveler framework geometry, a specific binding that keyed to the practitioner's own magical signature, using their power as the anchor. The crueler elegance of it made her jaw tighten. The more powerful the practitioner, the stronger the binding. "The binding uses their own magic against them," she said. "So we don't counter-curse it," Harry said, understanding immediately. "We redirect it." He was already thinking through the mechanism. "If the binding uses their magic as an anchor, we give the magic somewhere else to go." She raised her wand. "Hold the stag on the node. I need the patronus resonance to give the redirected magic a channel." He held it steady. The stag blazed at the node, and Hermione cast not a breaking curse, not a forceful counter, but a redirection working the same principle she'd used on the East Wing wards: feed the energy through itself, but give it a new path. The practitioner's own magic turned from anchor to bridge, and the node came undone like a knot releasing. The signature surged free. From the membrane boundary behind them, she felt Wung's portal open, a hand reaching through dimensional space, a way out. The freed practitioner was pulled toward it with the automatic momentum of someone released from constraint finding the nearest exit. They moved to the second node. Hermione adapted the counter working on the fly. Each binding was slightly different, tuned to the individual practitioner, and Harry held the tether and kept the stag blazing and tracked the framework geometry simultaneously with the focused tactical attention he'd always had in situations where multiple things needed tracking at once. The framework hummed around them, vast and lit with the patronus silver, and somewhere deep in the rift space something had noticed them. "They know we're in," Harry said. "How long do we have? Depends on how fast they move." He was reading the framework's emotional resonance, the deep signature of the unraveler practitioners at the keystone, the shift in their attention. "They're not coming out to us, they're reinforcing the keystone." He paused. "Myra's there. You can feel her. She's different from the others, older. The emotional signature is, it's not like the framework nodes. It's like," he concentrated, "it's like the ancient one, that same depth." But pointed inward. She looked at him. "Inward. She's not broadcasting out," he said. "She's holding very tightly." He paused. "She's afraid." That was information she hadn't expected. She filed it and kept moving. Second node, a young man whose magical signature felt South Asian, fiery and instinctive, the kind of caster who worked on emotion rather than structure. Binding on him was tighter than the first. They'd learned after the first practitioner was taken, presumably, and adjusted. It took Hermione 4 minutes and 2 variations on the redirect working before the node released him. He came through with considerably more energy than the first practitioner. She felt him push actively through Wung's portal, the momentum of someone who had been planning their exit since the moment they'd been captured. "Good," she said to the air, too. The third node was. The framework here was dense with unraveler reinforcement. She could feel the geometry tightening as they approached, the structure compensating for the 2 lost nodes by compressing the remaining ones. It was an intelligent response. Myra's architecture was self-correcting. "She's adjusting the framework in real time," Hermione said. "Can she do that from the keystone?" "Apparently." She studied the third node. The binding was different again, not just tighter, structurally different, built with a counter-redirect trap. If she used the same mechanism, the working would fold back on itself. She felt the shape of the counter mechanism the way you felt the shape of a lock before deciding how to pick it. "She's anticipated the redirect technique," she said. "How long to find a new mechanism?" "I'm thinking." "How long?" "I'm thinking, Harry." He held the stag steady. She worked through it in the 40 seconds she gave herself, not the redirect, something else, something that didn't engage with the binding's own architecture at all. The binding used the practitioner's magic as an anchor. The counter trap was designed to catch anyone trying to redirect that magic. But if you didn't redirect the magic at all, if you gave the practitioner a completely external magical input that overwhelmed the binding's threshold, "Expecto patronum," she said, pointing her wand at the node. It wasn't her patronus, she'd never fully corporeal cast it, that had always been Harry's particular gift. What came was light, pure, concentrated magical intent, not a full corporeal form but a blazing pulse of exactly the kind of energy that had freed the first 2 nodes, except this time it came from outside rather than redirecting from within. It hit the binding and the binding's countertrap tried to catch it and found it had nothing to catch because the energy wasn't the practitioner's magic at all. It was Hermione's. The node blew open. She felt Harry's surge of not surprise. He didn't do surprise easily, something more like delight. "You just used your patronus attempt as a crowbar," he said. "It's not a crowbar, it's a targeted external energy injection," she said. "And it worked, so keep moving." The 4th and 5th nodes were deeper in, and the framework was moving now, actively contracting, pulling its geometry tight, Myra's corrections accelerating as the structural loss mounted. Hermione could feel the mathematics of it. 2 more nodes and the framework lost geometric cohesion. The keystone would be under direct stress. She'll know we're coming for it, Harry said. She's known since the first node. Hermione was moving fast, reading the framework shifts, adjusting the path. She's not trying to stop us from freeing the practitioners. She's using the time, building defenses. Or she stopped. Something in the framework's emotional resonance was wrong. Not the unraveler signatures, something else. Harry, the 2 uncertain positions, the probable practitioners. What about them? They're not practitioners, she said. She felt it clearly now, the framework geometry around those positions distinct from the node binding pattern. They're not people at all, they're constructed signatures, decoys. She looked at him. Myra built fake node signatures into the framework to make us think there were more practitioners than there are. Harry was quiet for a moment. What? She ran the framework mathematics. The decoy nodes weren't just false signatures, they were load-bearing fakes, part of the geometric structure. Because removing the real nodes destabilizes the framework, but she saw it. But the decoy nodes are compensating. They're carrying the geometric load the real nodes can't carry once they're freed. She looked at Harry. If we'd removed the decoy nodes on the way through thinking they were practitioners, the framework would have collapsed, he said. Before we reached the keystone, taking the target streams with it, she said, the whole framework collapsing from an uncontrolled structural failure rather than a controlled keystone destruction. She paused. That would have been worse than doing nothing. She planned for us to find the 5 real ones and then go for the decoys, he said, and collapse the framework ourselves. Yes. She looked at the decoy positions with something that was very close to admiration even as it made her angry. It's an extraordinarily elegant trap, which you just dismantled by identifying it, which I just dismantled by paying attention to the mathematics. She marked the decoy positions on her internal map, avoid, leave intact, 2 more practitioners and then straight to the keystone, don't touch anything that looks like an extra node. Noted, he moved the stag. You're extraordinary, you know that. She blinked. He'd said it in the same tone as everything else, not dramatically, not as a moment, just as information, the way he said things that he considered obvious. She felt the warm, complicated thing spike briefly and then settle. Keep moving, she said. The 4th node was Strange's student. Hermione felt her before she saw the node, the camotage signature, formal and precise, with Strange's specific methodological fingerprints in the foundational architecture. The binding on her was viciously tight. Whoever had bound her had known exactly what they were doing, had known her magical system, had known how to make it work against her with maximum efficiency. She's been here a long time, Harry said quietly. I know. Hermione raised her wand. She used the external injection method, sharper this time, more precise because the binding was built to resist everything, and felt Harry push the stag into the node simultaneously without being asked, adding his Patronus resonance to her injection, 2 magical systems hitting the binding from opposite directions. The node released with a force that shook the framework. 4. The 5th node was different from all the others. The practitioner here was older. The signature had the deep layering of someone who had been using their magic for decades, the geological accumulation of power that aged like wood. The binding on them was almost gentle, which was disturbing in a specific way, not because gentle was wrong, because gentle meant the practitioner was being preserved deliberately. Myra wants this one, Harry said. The strongest node, Hermione said. The one doing the most work. She looked at the binding. She's been feeding on this signature. She didn't pause to be angry about it. She freed them. 5. The framework heaved. The geometric structure now running on decoy nodes and keystone alone was visibly stressed. She could feel it in the rift space topology, the dimensional membrane shivering around them. They had minutes before the compensating geometry failed. The keystone, she said. They went toward the center. The deeper rift space was extraordinary. She'd known it would be, Harry had told her on day 7, in the pocket dimension, his voice quiet with something other than exhaustion. She'd believed him. She hadn't understood until she was in it, until the dimensional membrane opened up around her into the vast and total space of the rift space interior, the place where all the possible configurations of reality existed simultaneously, and the air, if you could call it air, was thick with the weight of everything that could be and had been and might yet be. It was like standing in a library the size of everything. He'd been exactly right. She didn't have time to appreciate it properly, which she noted as something to return to, and kept moving. The keystone was visible from a long way out, not as a physical object, as a concentration of dimensional energy, a point of such compressed geometric significance that the rift space around it was distorted, reality bending around the keystone the way light bent around mass, and at the keystone, figures. 5 of them arranged in a defensive geometry around the aperture, their working filling the space with structured dimensional barriers. And at the center of the 5, Myra. She was not what Hermione had expected, which was a reflection of the Ancient One or something close to it. She was younger in appearance, although appearance meant nothing at this scale, with a face that was serious rather than serene and eyes that held the specific quality of someone who had spent 200 years being completely certain they were right. She looked at Harry and Hermione as they approached, and her expression was complicated. It was not the expression of a villain confronting heroes. It was the expression of someone who had been waiting for a conversation they'd been dreading. You freed all five, she said, not accusingly, as information, and identified the decoys. Hermione said, we didn't touch them. Something moved in Myra's face, not surprise. She knew by now what Hermione was capable of, something more like reassessment. You would have made exceptional unravelers, she said. We make exceptional anythings, Harry said pleasantly, but we're not interested. The four unraveler practitioners around Myra held their positions, and Hermione read them quickly, strong, experienced, their dimensional working solid and carefully constructed. The barriers between them and the keystone were layered, each one keyed to deflect different magical signatures. She could see the architecture of it, and she could see, because she was who she was, that it was built against either wand magic or sling ring sorcery, not both simultaneously. Myra had studied the crossover between the two systems. She hadn't fully accounted for two people who embodied that crossover. The keystone, Harry said to Myra. We're going to destroy it. I'd like to do it without hurting anyone, but that depends entirely on what happens in the next few minutes. The keystone is the framework's survival, Myra said. Without it, the framework collapses safely and the 7 targeted streams survive, Hermione said. Which is the outcome you'd prefer if you actually believe what Teverin told us, that this is about conservation rather than destruction. Myra looked at her sharply. Teverin's argument is wrong, Hermione said. She said it without anger, with the clarity of someone who had spent 10 days thinking about this and arrived at mathematical certainty. The multiverse doesn't have finite dimensional energy. That's the foundational premise of the Unraveler theory, and it's incorrect. She held Myra's gaze. The dimensional energy released by a collapse doesn't save other streams. It disperses through the membrane and dissipates. You're not conserving anything. The streams you've collapsed are gone and the energy is gone with them, and the only thing you've accomplished is the permanent elimination of everything that existed in those streams. Myra's jaw tightened. The theoretical basis was developed on incomplete data 400 years ago, before anyone understood the membrane topology properly, Hermione said. I've had the complete topology for 10 days. The mathematics doesn't support the conservation conclusion. I can show you the derivation. This is not the time for a mathematics lecture, Harry said quietly. It might be exactly the time, she said. And then one of the 4 Unraveler practitioners made a move, a dimensional working fired at Harry sharp and fast, a compression working designed to fold him out of the rift space. He spun the Patronus in front of it without raising his wand. The stag hit the working and the silver light consumed it, dissolving the dimensional compression before it completed, and the Patronus didn't even flicker. Harry looked at the practitioner who'd thrown it. Please don't do that again, he said. The practitioner tried again, and this time Harry raised his wand with his free hand and cast Expelliarmus while holding the Patronus steady with the amplifier, and the practitioner's sling ring cracked off his hand and spun away into the rift space, and the practitioner stood there with a very empty right hand and the same expression the Unraveler in the East Wing had worn. 3 of the remaining 4 tried simultaneously. Harry moved. It wasn't casting in the deliberate, considered way he worked in training. It was the combat casting that came from years of surviving situations where hesitation was terminal. He moved through the rift space using the portal opening motion he'd picked up in his first hour with a sling ring, opening small spatial folds to redirect the incoming workings rather than blocking them, letting the Unraveler's own dimensional attacks slide through folded space and dissipate harmlessly, all while keeping the Patronus blazing and the tether to Hermione unbroken. Hermione, meanwhile, was dealing with Myra. Myra didn't attack. She held her position at the keystone and constructed rapidly, with the precision of 2 centuries of practice, a defensive barrier that incorporated both wand magic counters and sling ring architecture. Hermione felt the shape of it and recognized the Ancient One's foundational techniques underneath Myra's innovations, not imitation, evolution. The student who had gone further than the teacher in the wrong direction. You studied intent-based magic for years, Hermione said, walking the barrier's perimeter. You built the theoretical framework for the emotional topology. Yes, Myra said. She was watching Hermione move with the careful attention of a duelist tracking a threat. The living variable, Hermione said. That was yours, originally. A pause, something moved in Myra's face. Yes, you discovered that emotional resonance could be used to navigate dimensional space. That the 5th axis was a compound variable, that static models couldn't capture it. Hermione stopped moving. She looked at Myra directly. And then you used that discovery to build a weapon. It's not a weapon, Myra said, and for the first time her voice had something in it that wasn't controlled. It's a correction. The multiverse is suffering because of its own overextension, with incorrect data, Hermione said. You built the whole theory on incorrect data. The conservation premise is wrong. I can prove it. She held up her notebook. She'd brought it into the rift space because of course she had. The complete 5th axis model built with the actual membrane topology data. It shows the energy dispersal pattern from a dimensional collapse. No conservation, no redistribution, pure loss. Myra looked at the notebook. She looked at it the way a person looked at something they were afraid of because it might change something they'd organized their entire life around. Your data set is limited, she said. You've been here 10 days. The membrane topology data is the Sanctum's complete record, Hermione said. 200 years of Rift event data plus Loki's Asgardian map plus the framework's own internal resonance readings which I've been running since we entered the Rift space. She met Myra's eyes. You wanted to save things, I understand that. The impulse to fix a problem that most people are too comfortable to address, I understand it. Paused, but you've been fixing the wrong problem with a method that makes everything worse. And the data proves it. Will you look at the data? The rift space was enormous and electric around them. Behind Hermione, Harry had 2 of the 4 practitioners subdued and the other 2 significantly less confident in their positions. The framework was shivering with the stress of 5 freed nodes and decoys that couldn't compensate much longer. Myra looked at the notebook. She looked at it for a very long time. The derivation on page 49, Hermione said quietly. Start there. Myra looked at page 49. Hermione watched her read it, watched the moment it landed, the specific quality of a brilliant person encountering a flaw in their own work that they cannot argue around. It wasn't quick, it wasn't dramatic. It was a slow, terrible, quiet thing, like a very large structure discovering that its foundation is not what it thought. Myra lowered the barrier. It didn't drop completely, it reduced, softened, went from weapon grade to something closer to a boundary, but it lowered. And the 2 remaining Unraveler practitioners looked at Myra and looked at each other with the particular alarm of people whose commanding officer has just stopped commanding. The artifact, Harry said from behind Hermione. He dealt with the other 3, his voice was calm. We need it. Myra reached into the Keystone's architecture and removed a small object, the dimensional map, the Asgardian record, compressed into a disk of something that looked like solidified light. She held it out. The calculations, she said to Hermione, your complete derivation, I want to see all of it. I'll send it through Wung, Hermione said. Through the Sanctum, properly, not here. She held Myra's gaze. When this is over, and the Sanctum's people will, the Ancient One, Hermione said. Your teacher, she wants to speak with you. She paused, not for the reasons you're thinking. Myra was quiet for a long moment, then she held out the artifact. Harry took it. He tucked it into his jacket and looked at Hermione and they had the 2-second conversation. The keystone, I know, you or me, together. They turned to the keystone. It was the most complex single working either of them had ever attempted, destroying the geometric anchor of a 7-stream framework in a controlled way, releasing the stored stress outward through the rift space rather than into the targeted dimensional streams. It required precision that no single magic system working alone could provide. The sling ring sorcery needed for dimensional geometry, the wand magic needed for directed intentional force, the emotional resonance needed to guide both. Harry raised the Patronus to full strength. The stag blazed at the keystone and the membrane resonance lit up around them, the framework architecture suddenly visible in complete silver clarity, every arm, every node, the full geometric structure laid out in the Patronus light. Hermione read the structure in the light, found the angles, worked the 5th axis mathematics in real time and cast. It wasn't one spell. It was a sequence, her own wand magic creating the directional force, Harry's Patronus providing the resonance channel, the amplifier extending the working through the full framework, the intent of both of them together guiding the collapse inward toward the keystone away from everything else. The keystone came apart, not explosively. The opposite of explosively, it released slowly, the geometric stress draining out of the framework and dispersing through the rift space in the broad dissipation wave Hermione had predicted, washing out in all directions through the membrane without touching the 7 target streams. The framework arms went one by one, each one releasing cleanly, the dimensional structure unwinding from the outside inward until there was nothing left of it but rift space and the residual warmth of freed energy. 7 streams survived, including theirs. The rift space was very quiet. Harry lowered the Patronus. The silver light faded. In the deep interior of the rift space it was enormous and dark and complete, and Hermione stood in it for one moment and looked at everything that surrounded them, all the possibility, all the reality, all the enormous impossible structure of everything that was and could be, and she felt it, genuinely, the thing Harry had been trying to describe on day 7. Worth seeing for itself. Behind them, Wung's portal opened, orange and real, a door back through the membrane to the Sanctum's main hall, to Strange and Stark and the Ancient One and New York and the rest of everything. Harry looked at Hermione. The rift space moved around them with its deep and ancient patience. After tomorrow, he said. She looked at him. They were standing in the interior of the dimensional membrane, in the space between all possible realities, and his voice was the same as it always was, direct, unhurried, certain. After tomorrow is now, she said. He closed the distance between them and she met him halfway, which was how they'd always operated, and the kiss was not dramatic, not desperate, not a collision. It was 2 people arriving at something that had been waiting for them with an extraordinary amount of patience, warm and real and completely specifically right in the way of things that should have happened a long time ago and hadn't for insufficient reasons. The rift space held them. When they stepped back, the portal was still open, warm and orange, waiting. Wung's been holding that portal for a while, Harry said. Wung is very patient, she said. They went through. Chapter 6. Between 2 worlds, the Sanctum's main hall had never been so full. Wang had held the portal for 11 minutes and 20 seconds, which he mentioned to no one, and through it had come 5 practitioners in varying states of exhaustion, then Harry and Hermione, and finally, with the specific quality of someone who had walked through a great many doors and found the other side wanting, Myra. The Ancient One was waiting. She stood in the center of the hall the way she always stood, without ceremony, without performance, with the particular stillness of someone who had cleared everything unnecessary from their posture a very long time ago. She looked at Myra with an expression that contained 240 years of something complex and specific, and Myra looked back at her with the expression of someone who had spent 240 years being completely certain about everything and had just, in the span of one conversation in the rift space, stopped being certain about the foundational thing. Nobody spoke for a moment. The hall held it, the 5 freed practitioners sitting or standing against the walls in various states of exhaustion and recovery, Strange moving through them with Wang's help, Stark in the suit but helmet up reading diagnostics, Loki standing near the door with his arms crossed and an expression of careful attention that he wasn't bothering to conceal. Then the Ancient One said, Myra. Myra said, the data is wrong. I know, the Ancient One said. I mean mine was wrong, Myra said. The conservation model, the foundational assumption, she showed me. She stopped. She had the look of someone whose anger had been their engine for 2 centuries and who had just discovered that the fuel was the wrong kind. It's wrong. Yes, the Ancient One said. She let it sit without additional weight. I know, you knew 200 years ago. I suspected. I didn't have the complete topology data. She looked at Myra with the expression she used for things that were true and needed to be said plainly. I also didn't make the argument well enough to reach you. That's not your failure, it's mine. The hall was very quiet. Myra looked at her hands, the hands that had built a framework that had almost erased 7-dimensional streams, including the one that contained everything Harry and Hermione had ever known. She didn't say anything else. The Ancient One didn't require her to. They stood in the particular silence of 2 people who have a great deal to work through and have tacitly agreed that right now is not the time. Strange moved to Harry and Hermione. He looked at them, a full assessment top to bottom, the clinical and detailed appraisal of someone checking for damage and trying not to show that the concern is genuine. Injuries? No, Harry said. You're sure? I'd notice. Rift space exposure at that depth has delayed effects, Strange said. Dimensional disorientation, temporal drift, sensory recalibration. Strange, Harry said. We are fine. Strange looked at Hermione. Fine, she confirmed. The framework, gone, Hermione said. Completely. The keystones destroyed and the stress dissipated through the rift space membrane rather than the target streams. The decoy nodes are still in place but they're inert now, no framework to anchor to. She pulled out her notebook because she always pulled out her notebook. I have the complete collapse sequence recorded. We should document the 5th axis behavior during the keystone destruction while I remember it clearly. Strange looked at her notebook and then at her and then at Harry. She wants to document the collapse sequence, he said. Yes, Harry said. We just dismantled a 7-stream dimensional weapon from the inside. We did, Harry agreed, and she wants to document. While it's fresh, Hermione said, without looking up from the page she'd already started writing on. Strange looked at Harry with an expression that had given up most of its complications and arrived somewhere considerably closer to genuine warmth than either of them would probably acknowledge. I'll get you a better pen, he said to Hermione. The one you're using is running out. She looked up briefly. Thank you. He went to find a pen. Harry watched him go and then looked at the hall, at the freed practitioners, at Myra and the Ancient One, at Stark already in conversation with Wang about the portal diagnostics, at Loki, who was now looking at Harry with the specific expression he'd worn in the study when he said this is going to be very interesting. Harry met his eyes. Loki raised one eyebrow. Harry raised one back. It was somehow a complete conversation. Loki uncrossed his arms and crossed the hall with the ease of someone who moved through spaces as if they'd already decided to belong there. He stopped in front of Harry and held out his hand, palm up. Harry reached into his jacket and placed the artifact disc in Loki's palm. Loki looked at it. Something moved in his face that was the most honest thing Harry had seen from him, brief, unguarded, the expression of someone holding a piece of an enormous loss that they've been carrying a long time and had almost stopped expecting to recover. He closed his fingers around the disc. Thank you, he said, not the courtly version, the actual version. Don't use it for anything, Harry said. Loki looked at him. I gave you my word. I know, I'm just saying it out loud. A reasonable precaution. Loki pocketed the disc. He looked at Harry for a moment with the ancient, complicated eyes that had seen considerably more than Harry's 22 years contained. You did well in there. We did well, Harry said. Loki glanced at Hermione, who was still writing with the pen Strange had returned. Yes, he said, you did. He paused. If you're in this universe for any extended period, he stopped. Started again with the particular care of someone choosing words that meant something. There are things in the rift space that I've been unable to access. The artifact's companion records. They'd require someone with your specific membrane sensitivity. He looked at Harry. When this is settled, if you're interested. We might be, Harry said. He didn't commit and he didn't dismiss. We'll see where we are. Loki nodded, and it was the respectful nod rather than the courtly one. He looked at the hall, at the Ancient One and Myra in their continuing quiet conversation, at Strange handing Hermione a better pen, at Stark crouched next to one of the freed practitioners and talking gently, surprisingly gently, while the practitioner collected herself. "This is a better outcome than I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Significantly more destruction," Loki said. "Less conversation," he almost smiled. "You negotiated with the person who almost erased your world." "She made a mistake based on incorrect data," Harry said. "That's different from being someone who can't be reached." Loki was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "it is." He looked at Harry as if that sentence had landed somewhere specific. "A generous assessment, a practical one," Harry said. "Destroying people is expensive, reaching them is cheaper, and the results last longer." Loki turned that over. "You sound like someone who's tried both." "I've had to do some of both," Harry said. He said it without drama. "I prefer the second." Loki looked at him for one more moment with the expression of someone filing something away carefully. Then he turned and crossed to the door and was gone in the particular way he had of departing, not dramatically, not with announcement, simply by no longer being in a room. The hall settled. The 5 practitioners were stabilizing, Strange and Wung moving between them with the practiced efficiency of a triage team, providing tea, water, portals home when the practitioners were ready. The young man from the second node, the South Asian practitioner whose signature had been all fire and instinct, sat against the wall drinking tea with the focused dedication of someone who had been wanting tea for a very long time. And when Hermione passed him on her way to the kitchen, he said, without looking up, "Thank you, both of you. I felt you coming from the third node." "You held on," she said. "I had to," he said. "I had things to get back to." She nodded. She understood that perfectly. The kitchen was empty. She put the kettle on and stood at the counter and looked at her notes from the rift space, the collapse sequence documentation still in progress, the fifth axis behavior recorded in the only real-time data set anyone had ever collected from inside an active dimensional framework. She was holding, she understood, the foundational data for a completely new branch of dimensional theory, not in either world, in both. The crossover that Myra had theorized and that Hermione had lived. She thought about that for a moment, about what she was holding and what it meant and what she was going to do with it. Harry came in. He knew where to find her the way she knew where to find him. He sat on the counter the way he always sat in kitchens, on surfaces rather than in chairs, as if he'd grown up in spaces where the chairs were taken and the counter was the best available option, which was in fact partially true. He watched her make tea without offering to help, which was correct. He knew better than to interrupt her in the middle of something, even something as simple as making tea when she was also clearly thinking. She poured 2 cups and sat across from him at the small table, and they looked at each other in the way they'd been looking at each other for 11 years, and also more recently in a way that was new. "The way home," she said. "The Ancient One mentioned it this morning," Harry said. "Before we went in, she said the rift collapse energy redistributed when we came through. The original rift is sealed, but the energy is somewhere in the membrane." She turned her cup in her hands. "Now that the framework is gone, the membrane should be stable enough to locate where the energy went. Which means we can open the rift again," Harry said. "From this side with the right mechanism." He paused. "The Patronus resonance and the fifth axis model. We could go home," she said. He was quiet. "We could go home," she said again, not as repetition as the full weight of the sentence placed on the table between them where they could both look at it honestly. Harry looked at his coffee cup. "Ron," he said, "and Ginny and George and your godson and Neville and Luna and everyone who's—" She stopped. "Yes, everyone. They think we're dead," Harry said. "They think we're gone," she said. "Whether they've concluded dead depends on—" She let it go. "The Department of Mysteries will have found the sealed rift. They know something happened. Whether they know what, they don't," Harry said. "Croker doesn't have the dimensional theory to know what a cross-dimensional rift looks like from the inside." "No," she looked at her cup. "They'll know something happened to us. They won't know if there's a way back or a reason to keep looking." "Ron will keep looking," Harry said quietly. "He won't stop." She felt the truth of that settle in her chest. "No, he won't." Sat with it. The kitchen held them warm and familiar now after 10 days of coffee and Wung's food and late-night working sessions, as familiar as any kitchen she'd shared with him, the Burroughs kitchen or the Granger house kitchen or the tent's small camping kettle. "I want to go back," Harry said. "I know," she said. "So do I, and I want—" He stopped. He looked at her. "I want what's here too. I want to keep doing this, the work, the scale of it." He paused. "You." She held his gaze. "You have me," she said. "That's not conditional on location." "I know." He almost smiled. "I'm just saying it out loud." She recognized the echo of what she'd said to Loki about the artifact and felt something loosen in her chest, some tension she'd been carrying that she hadn't fully catalogued. "You've been next to me since we were 11, she said. "You carried a tent with me for a year in the worst circumstances imaginable. You are Harry, you are the most present person I have ever known. That is not going to change because of which side of a dimensional membrane we're on." He was very still for a moment. "Then, I love you," he said. She looked at him. The words sat between them with the quality of something that had been true for a very long time and had simply been waiting to be said, the way mathematical conclusions waited to be written down, not new, just acknowledged. "I know," she said. "Then I love you too." He let out a breath that was quiet and complete. Okay, he said. Okay, she agreed. They sat for a moment in the particular quality of things resolved, not the dramatic resolution of something that had been agonizing, just the warm, clean settling of something that had always been true, finally given its correct name. We should go home, she said. Yes, and we should come back, she said. He looked at her. We can open the rift with the Patronus resonance and the fifth axis mechanism, she said. Both directions. If we can go home, we can also return. This doesn't have to be a one-time door. She had her notebook out. She was always going to have her notebook out. This was simply true about her and always would be, and she was already sketching the mechanism. The living variable makes the rift two-directional. It responds to continuous emotional state, which means it doesn't close behind us. It breathes, it stays open as long as the intent holds. Harry was watching her right. You worked this out when, in the rift space while we were destroying the keystone. She looked up. I had a moment. He stared at her. You solved the return travel problem while simultaneously dismantling a 7-stream dimensional weapon. I had a very clear head, she said. The rift space is wonderful for thinking. He laughed, the real one, the full one that she'd been hearing more and more of over the last 10 days and that she intended to keep hearing. Of course it is, he said. Of course you did. She finished the sketch and turned the notebook to show him. Look, the mechanism uses the Patronus frequency as the carrier wave and the fifth axis emotional topology as the directional control. We set the intent as bidirectional, not open a door here but maintain a door between 2 points. The living variable keeps it responsive rather than fixed. She pointed to the critical element. The only limitation is that the intent has to be maintained. If neither of us is actively thinking about the connection, the door closes, he said. Temporarily, it would reopen with intent. She looked at the sketch. It's not a permanent solution. Eventually, we'd want to build a fixed aperture mechanism that doesn't require continuous emotional input. But for now we can go home and come back, he said. Yes, and eventually we build something permanent. Given enough time and access to the Sanctum library and Tony Stark's dimensional modeling capacity, she said. Yes, I think we could build something permanent. He was looking at the sketch with the expression he had when he was seeing the whole picture, not the details which were hers, but the full shape of what the details added up to. You want to build a bridge, he said. Between the two worlds, she said, between the two magical systems, between everything the wizarding world knows and everything this universe knows. She paused. Myra spent 2 centuries trying to use the crossover between intent-based magic and dimensional sorcery as a weapon. I'd rather use it as a door. He was quiet for a long moment, not processing. He'd understood immediately. The quiet was something else, the particular quality he had when something landed in him at a real depth. Yeah, he said, let's build that. Strange appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the two of them, the notebook, the tea, the particular atmospheric quality of the room, and made an assessment in his usual half-second and chose to address only the professional dimension of it. The Ancient One wants everyone in the main hall, he said. When you're ready. Now, Hermione said, standing. Strange looked at Harry. Now, Harry confirmed. Strange turned and went back down the corridor. Harry and Hermione followed, and somewhere between the kitchen and the main hall his hand found hers and stayed there, easy and warm and completely unremarkable, in the way of things that had always been going to happen and had simply arrived. The main hall had arranged itself over the last hour into something approaching order. The 5 freed practitioners were in varying states of recovery. The Kamatage student, whose name was Una, was sitting with Strange and talking quietly with the kind of focused intensity of someone giving a full debrief, while simultaneously being unable to stop moving her hands. The South Asian practitioner was asleep on the settee with the absolute commitment of someone who had not slept properly in months. The Eastern European woman from the first node was in a precise conversation with Wung about exit portals, clearly determined to leave for home as soon as she was stable. The other 2, the ones from the 4th and 5th nodes, were the older ones, the practitioners who had been in the framework longest. They sat together with the quiet of people who had survived something together and didn't need to talk about it yet. One of them, a man in his 60s with the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room, was watching Myra with an expression that was very carefully not what it was. Myra was across the hall with the Ancient One, their conversation ongoing, low and serious. Stark had the helmet down and was reviewing data on a screen he'd projected from his suit's internal systems. He looked up when Harry and Hermione came in, read the room, and said nothing about the hands, which meant he'd noticed. The Ancient One turned from Myra when they entered. The mechanism, she said to Hermione. Hermione held up the notebook. A bidirectional rift aperture using the Patronus frequency as the carrier wave and the fifth axis emotional topology as directional control, she said. It's not permanent, it requires active intent to maintain, but it works. You've modeled it. In the rift space, she hesitated. I haven't tested it. No, the Ancient One said. You'd need to test it from the other side. Our side, Harry said. Yes, the Ancient One looked between them, which means going home to test it. And coming back to confirm it works bidirectionally, Hermione said. The Ancient One was quiet for a moment. In the hall around them, the morning light had moved to afternoon light, that particular quality of a day that had contained enormous things and was now resting, the light softer and more golden. I'd like you to come back, she said. Not for the work, though the work matters, because she paused, and the pause was uncharacteristic enough that everyone in the room paid attention to it. You've done something here in 10 days that I've been attempting to accomplish for 50 years. A genuine synthesis between the two magical traditions, not a translation, a synthesis, something new. She looked at Hermione's notebook. What you've built deserves to be built properly, both sides of it. The bridge, Harry said. She looked at him. Yes, Stark said from across the room. If you're building a permanent cross-dimensional aperture mechanism, I want to be involved. You will be, Hermione said. And the dimensional energy modeling, Stark, Strange said. I'm just establishing my role in the bridge, Strange said, in a tone that suggested the bridge was already a concrete object rather than a nascent idea and that he had an established role in it that didn't need announcement. He looked at Harry and Hermione. When you come back, we continue. We continue, Harry said. Strange nodded. It was the nod of someone who had stopped being territorial about 10 days ago and replaced it with something better, something that felt more like partnership and less like competition, and had arrived at sufficient peace with that to let it show. Yuna looked up from her conversation with Wang. When you come back, she said, the fifth axis model, I want to study it. I'll bring full documentation, Hermione said. I'll have questions. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. The older man, the one from the fifth node, the one who had been watching Myra, stood. He was the practitioner with the deepest magical signature, the one whose power had been doing the most work in the framework. He looked at Harry and Hermione and said in accented English, my name is Farouk. I have been in that framework for 7 months. He paused. I was beginning to stop believing in retrieval. Harry met his eyes. You were the hardest node to crack, he said. Your magic is, he considered how to say it, very strong. The binding used that. We had to push harder. Farouk nodded. I know, I could feel it. He looked at Hermione. The external injection, your intent magic reaching in from outside the binding architecture. A pause. I tried to help from the inside. I felt it, she said. You made it faster. He nodded again. Farouk al-Rashid, he said. Cairo. If your bridge needs practitioners who have experienced the rift space from the inside, we'll find you, Harry said. Farouk's expression settled into something that was close to the expression Harry had seen on veterans, not peace exactly, but the particular orientation of someone who has been through the worst and come back and found their footing. He sat down again. Myra said from across the hall without turning, the bridge you're building. Everyone looked at her. She was still facing the Ancient One, but her voice was directed at the room. The fifth axis model, the synthesis mechanism, the bidirectional aperture. She paused. I spent 2 centuries on a version of that problem. I went the wrong direction. She turned. She looked at Hermione with the expression of a mathematician looking at a solution that is simultaneously correct and painful. When you have the complete derivation, she stopped, started again. I'd like to see it. Understand where the conservation model failed, too. She looked at her hands. I'd like to understand it fully. Hermione looked at her. I'll send it through the sanctum when we're home, she said. All of it. Myra nodded. She turned back. The conversation with the Ancient One resumed, quieter than before and slower, with the quality of 2 people who have put down weapons and picked up a much more difficult tool. Harry squeezed Hermione's hand once. She squeezed back. When do we open it? He said to her. She thought about the mechanism, the patronus frequency, the fifth axis, the bidirectional intent. She thought about what they needed, not preparation. The theory was solid. She knew it in the way she knew things that were correct. What they needed was a moment of genuine, complete intent, both of them, the living variable running at full resonance, the emotional topology doing what it did when it wasn't suppressed or performed but simply true. Now is probably good, she said. He looked at her. In the hall. The sanctum's ward energy will support the working, she said. The membrane boundary is stable post-framework. The amplifier is still keyed to your patronus frequency. She looked at him. I can't think of a better moment. He considered this, then he looked at Strange. Clear some space. Strange looked at him for exactly 1 second and then stepped back. Everyone else followed without being asked, the room arranging itself into a watching circle with the instinctive understanding of people who recognized a significant working when it was about to happen. Harry moved to the center of the hall. Hermione stood beside him, not facing him. Beside him, which was the correct position, had always been the correct position, because the working required 2 simultaneous intents in the same direction, rather than 2 people looking at each other. She raised her wand. He raised his and the amplifier and felt the patronus building in him, not yet cast, just ready, the full warmth and weight of it gathered. She felt the fifth axis mathematics running in her mind, the emotional topology clear and exact, the directional control precise, here to there to here, bidirectional, living, open. Ready, she said. On you, he said. She cast. The fifth axis working left her wand as a complex structured thing, not light, not quite invisible, something in between, the dimensional geometry writing itself into the air of the sanctum's hall in shapes that corresponded to no notation any single tradition had developed. The membrane resonance rose immediately, the sanctum's old bones feeling it and responding, the wards shifting to accommodate rather than resist. Harry cast the patronus into her working. The stag blazed and the working caught it, and the fifth axis structure carried the patronus frequency outward, not into the hall, through it, through the wall, through the ward boundary, through the membrane itself, the living variable self-adjusting with every foot of reach, the intent steady and continuous and real. And then it found the redistributed energy. The signature of their own cross-dimensional collapse, scattered through the membrane when the original rift had sealed, sitting in the rift space like a song that had been played and left its resonance in the walls. The fifth axis working recognized it. The emotional topology of the working matched the topology of the original collapse, because both carried the same intent, the same people, and the energy gathered and the aperture formed. It was different from the orange sling ring portals. It was silver-edged, slightly luminous, and it moved not randomly but with the breathing quality of the living variable, expanding and contracting slightly with the ongoing intent that held it. Through it, a stone corridor torchlit, the particular quality of magical light that neither of them had seen in 10 days. The Ministry's lower levels, the Department of Mysteries. The Department of Mysteries, through a silver aperture 3 feet wide and breathing with their shared intent, visible and real in the center of the sanctum's main hall. Nobody said anything. Strange, after a moment, that's a stable bidirectional rift aperture. Yes, Hermione said. She was slightly breathless, not from effort, from the magnitude of having the thing work exactly as the mathematics predicted. You built that in the rift space during a crisis. I had a clear head. Stark said, Friday, are you recording this? Every frequency, Friday said. Harry was looking through the aperture. The Ministry corridor was empty late at night there or early morning, the torches burning low. He looked at it for a long moment with an expression Hermione recognized as the one he had when he was thinking about specific people he missed. Ron's going to lose his mind, he said. In a good way, she said. Absolutely in a good way. He turned to look at her. Ready. We have to come back, she said, to the room as much as to him. You will, the Ancient One said. She was standing at the edge of the circle as she always stood, slightly removed, seeing the hole. The bridge has to be built from both sides. Hermione looked at Strange. He looked back at her with the expression she'd come to understand as his version of everything he didn't say, which was considerable. The fifth axis documentation, he said. When you're back. Full derivation, she said. And the collapse sequence from today. And the aperture mechanism, Stark said. Obviously. And the Patronus frequency data from the deep rift space, Stark added. Stark, Strange said. I'm making a list. Make it when they're not standing in front of an open dimensional aperture. Stark pointed at Strange. Fair. Wong stepped forward. He looked at Harry and Hermione with the expression he'd had in the kitchen on the first night, the one that said more than the sentences did. He produced 2 takeout containers from somewhere unspecified and held them out. Harry stared at them. Wong, for the road, Wong said. Harry took both containers, passed one to Hermione, and looked at Wong with genuine warmth. Thank you, he said, for all of it. Wong nodded. Come back quickly, he said. I don't like imbalanced bookshelves. Hermione laughed. It came out fully this time, no frayed edges. The cataloging system, she said. I've been reorganizing the eastern section. I know, Wong said. You've been doing it correctly. Continue when you return. She looked at him and then at Strange and then at Stark, who was typing something furiously into his phone and had the distracted quality of someone filing notes for approximately 14 ongoing projects, and then at the Ancient One, who looked at her the way she'd looked at her from the beginning, as someone she'd been waiting for, recognized and trusted. 10 days, Hermione said to her. You covered considerable ground, the Ancient One said. We tend to. I know, she looked at both of them. Come back, she said, not as a request, as information, as the statement of something she was confident about. Harry looked at Hermione, she looked at Harry. They were standing in the center of the sanctum's main hall with a silver aperture to the Department of Mysteries open in front of them and take-out containers in their hands, and 11 years of everything they'd been to each other accumulated behind them. And the future was the kind of thing that contained both everything they'd left and everything they'd found, which was exactly the right kind of future to have. Together, he said. Always, she said. They stepped through. The silver aperture breathed behind them. It didn't close. The Ministry corridor was cold and torchlit and smelled of stone and old magic, the familiar smell of the world they'd grown up in, and it hit Hermione like the first real breath after being underwater, complete, specific, unmistakable. She stood still for exactly 1 second and let it land, the full weight of where they were and what they'd just come through. Harry was beside her. He was looking down the corridor with the expression of someone reading the familiar language of a place they'd known a long time, reassessing it with new eyes. Feels smaller, he said. We've been living in the dimensional membrane, she said. Everything is going to feel smaller for a while. He looked at her. Not everything. She took his hand. No, she said, not everything. They walked down the corridor. Their footsteps echoed in the early morning empty, the torches burning low, the stone old and full of magic that ran on different rails than what they'd been working in for 10 days but was still unmistakably theirs. The Department of Mysteries settled around them with the particular quality of a place that had witnessed enormous things and kept its own counsel about all of them. At the end of the corridor, before the door to the lift, Harry stopped. He turned and looked back at the silver aperture, still open, still breathing, visible from here as a slightly luminous frame in the middle of the empty corridor, through which the sanctum's warm main hall was visible, the people still in it, the Ancient One's figure just discernible. 10 days, he said. We saved 7-dimensional streams, she said. Freed 5 practitioners, found the Unraveler leadership, dismantled a 7-stream dimensional weapon, developed new dimensional theory. Built the foundational mechanism for a cross-dimensional bridge. She paused, and several other things. Several other things, he agreed, looking at their joined hands. It was quite a 10 days, she said. The best 10 days I've had in years, he said. He meant it simply and completely, which was how he meant everything that was true. He thought about the ministry, about the classified work and the committees, about all the things she'd wanted to do with enormous ideas and hadn't been able to because the world was too small for the ideas. And then she thought about the Sanctum Library and Strange's star charts and Stark's laboratory and the Rift space interior blazing with the Patronus light and the fifth axis mathematics flowering from theory into reality. And she thought, the world is not too small. I was in the wrong part of it. We need to find Ron, she said. He's probably in the Aura office, Harry said. Early shift, at 6 in the morning. He took the early shift so he could leave at 3. Harry looked at the aperture, then at the lift. After we talk to Ron, the unspeakables, she said, we need to give them a full report. After that, the minister will want a briefing. After that, he said. And there's the question of how we explain where we've been and what we've done and what we've built without creating a 17-department jurisdictional crisis over cross-dimensional. Hermione, he said. She stopped. After Ron, he said. After the unspeakables, after the minister, after all of it, what do you want? She looked at him. The corridor was quiet and cold, and the silver aperture breathed behind them. She thought about the question honestly, the way she always tried to think about honest questions. I want to go back and build the bridge, she said. I want to finish what we started. I want to do work at the scale it deserves to be done at. She paused. And I want you to stop standing 3 feet away from me in rooms when you could be standing next to me. He closed the 3 feet. Better, marginally, she said. He kissed her again, which was still exactly right, in the cold, torchlit corridor of the Department of Mysteries, which was possibly the least romantic location imaginable and yet managed to be fine anyway because location was not, it turned out, the relevant variable. When they stepped back, she was smiling and so was he, and neither of them pretended otherwise. The lift, she said. The lift, he agreed. They went up. The Ministry of Magic at 6:15 in the morning was quiet in the way of large bureaucratic buildings before the machinery of the day started. A few early arrivals, the cleaners, the security desk with its usual bored occupant who looked up when Harry and Hermione came out of the lift from sub-level 9 and blinked, then blinked again, then said, Potter, Granger. Morning, Harry said pleasantly. Is the Aura office open? The security guard stared at them. You've been for 3 days. The Department of Mysteries has been sealed because they thought. He stopped. Shacklebolt is going to. We'll explain to Shacklebolt, Hermione said. The Aura office is Ron Weasley on early shift. Yes, he's. The guard was still staring. Where have you been? Complicated, Harry said. Long story, very interesting. He looked at Hermione. East corridor, she said. They walked away from the security desk. Behind them, the guard was already reaching for his communication mirror with the focused urgency of someone who had just discovered they were going to be extremely interesting to talk about today. The Aura office was on level 2. They took the stairs because the lift was slow at this hour, and Hermione was aware of the building waking around them as they climbed, the sounds of early arrivals, a maintenance charm running somewhere, the distant pop of someone apparating into the atrium. Their world. Theirs specifically, particular, real and detailed and alive. The Aura office door was open. The early shift meant 4 desks occupied, and at the second desk from the window, working his way through a stack of case files with the focused determination of a man who had decided that work was the thing he was going to do instead of anything else, was Ron. He hadn't looked up. He was reading with his chin in his hand, red hair bright in the early lamplight, his uniform jacket slung over the chair back, and his tie loosened in the way it was always loosened by 6 in the morning, because Ron had never in his life maintained a regulation tie for more than 45 minutes. Harry stopped in the doorway. Hermione stood beside him. She watched him take it in, the familiar sight of Ron, alive and present and exactly himself, the particular quality of looking at someone you love who doesn't know you're looking. She knew what it felt like from the inside. She'd looked at Harry the same way for years. Ron, Harry said. Ron looked up. The sequence of expressions that crossed his face in the next 3 seconds was remarkable. First, the automatic assessment of an aura encountering an unexpected presence, then the recognition slamming in, then something enormous that wasn't one emotion but all of them simultaneously, crashing through the careful managed surface he'd been maintaining. He stood up. The case files went everywhere. He didn't notice. Harry, he said. His voice was not entirely level. What the where have you? He stopped. He looked at Hermione, he looked at Harry, he looked at their joined hands with an expression that moved through recognition, understanding, and a very specific about time that was so Ron that Hermione felt her throat tighten. We'll explain everything, Harry said. It's a long story. Are you all right? Ron said. His voice had found its level again, the aura's controlled register, but his eyes hadn't. We're very all right, Hermione said. Ron looked at them for a moment. Then he picked up his jacket in the specific manner of someone who has decided that whatever is happening, they are going to be present for all of it, and said, Right, we're going somewhere, nobody's going to interrupt us, my office. He looked at Harry. You look different. Good different or bad different? Harry said. Ron studied him. Like you got some sleep, he said, like you stopped carrying something. Harry looked at Hermione. She looked at him. Something like that, he said. They followed Ron down the corridor, and behind them the aura office erupted into the quiet scramble of 4 people reaching for communication mirrors simultaneously, and somewhere in the building the security guard's message was landing on the minister's desk, and the Department of Mysteries was about to receive news that was going to require a very large conference room. And in the Department of Mysteries sublevel corridor the silver aperture breathed. It stayed open. It was going to stay open. It was, Hermione thought, a beginning. In the weeks that followed, the bridge was built in both directions at once. Strange and Hermione worked the fifth axis mathematics into a fixed aperture mechanism over 6 weeks, producing something that didn't require continuous emotional input, a dimensional door that stood on its own, keyed to the resonance frequency of both worlds. Stark built the hardware. Wong installed it in the Sanctum's east wing, in the room where Harry and Hermione had first slept. The Ancient One attended the installation without comment, and with an expression that suggested she had been waiting for exactly this. Harry opened the fixed aperture for the first time from the Ministry side. Strange opened it simultaneously from the Sanctum side. When the two workings met in the middle, the aperture blazed silver for 3 seconds, the Patronus frequency running one last time as the carrier wave, the living variable handing off to the permanent mechanism, and then settled into a steady, quiet, open door between 2 worlds that had never spoken to each other before. Hermione submitted her complete fifth-axis derivation and the dimensional collapse sequence documentation to both the Department of Mysteries and the Sanctum Library simultaneously. The Ministry classified it within 6 hours. She appealed. The appeal took 11 days and she won, which was faster than any appeal in Ministry history, because by that point 3 senior unspeakables had read the work, and 3 unspeakables running simultaneously to the Minister's office to argue for declassification was a sight that apparently motivated rapid bureaucratic movement. Myra spent 3 months in genuine conversation with the Ancient One. At the end of it she submitted a full retraction of the conservation model's theoretical basis and began work on what she called the reconstruction model, a framework for stabilizing dimensional streams under stress rather than eliminating them. Hermione reviewed her first draft. She had 7 significant notes. Myra addressed all 7 and sent back a draft that Hermione had only 2 notes about. She understood this was going to be a long and interesting intellectual relationship. The 5 freed practitioners scattered back to their own worlds and returned, at intervals, the way people returned to the Sanctum once it had gotten its hooks into them. Farouk came back first, with 12 months of rift space experience he wanted to put to use. Una came back second, with papers that Strange read and then quietly reorganized his teaching around. The young man from the second node, his name was Arjun, Hermione learned eventually, came back third with the specific energy of someone who had decided that the problem of cross-dimensional magical synthesis was personally his to solve, and nobody argued with him about it. Loki visited the Sanctum exactly as often as was inconvenient and left information of exactly the quality that made his visits impossible to refuse. This remained constant. Ron visited. He stood in the Sanctum doorway the first time and looked at the sling ring artifacts and the self-organizing bookshelves and the geometric mandalas on the training room ceiling and said, "Right," in the specific tone of someone who is not going to be surprised by anything ever again as a matter of principle. Then he looked at Harry and Hermione, comfortable and purposeful and genuinely, visibly at ease in the place, and said, "You're happy here," not as a question. "We're happy lots of places," Harry said, "but especially here," Ron said. "Especially here," Harry agreed. Ron looked at the Sanctum around him. He looked at the open aperture in the east wing, the silver-edged door through which you could see the stone corridors of the Ministry if you stood at the right angle. He stood at the right angle and looked at both places at once for a moment. "Yeah, all right," he said. "Show me the library." He came back twice more after that. The bridge between the 2 worlds was not a dramatic thing when it was finished. It was a door in a wall in a building in Greenwich Village, and on the other side it was a door in a corridor in a building in London, and between them it was everything that had been built from the moment Harry and Hermione had come through the wrong door and landed on the Sanctum's floor with their wands up and their minds running. The magic that came from one side met the magic from the other side in the middle, and what they made together was something neither world had seen before, not translation, not crossover. Something new, something worth coming home for, something worth coming back for. Chapter 7, The Weight of Open Doors. 3 months after the bridge was built, someone tried to close it. Harry found out the way he found out most things that were going wrong. He felt it before he knew what it was. A disturbance in the aperture frequency, subtle and specific, the way you felt a change in air pressure before the weather turned. He was in the Sanctum training room working through a new variant of the Patronus dimensional interface with Arjun, who had, true to form, made himself indispensable within 2 weeks of returning, when the silver frequency running through the aperture's maintenance tone shifted by exactly the kind of fraction that meant something intentional. He stopped mid-cast. Arjun looked at him. "What?" "The aperture," Harry said. Arjun turned. Across the Sanctum, through 2 walls and a floor, the fixed aperture in the east wing was not visibly changed, not to normal senses. But Harry had spent 10 days working with the Patronus resonance as a dimensional sensor and 3 more months calibrating the aperture's maintenance tone, and the fraction it had shifted was unmistakable. "Someone's interfering with it," he said, from the Ministry side. Arjun had his sling ring out in under 2 seconds. "How long?" "Just started." Harry was already moving. "Get Hermione." He didn't wait. The aperture in the east wing was a clean rectangle of silver light in the stone wall, stable and steady as it had been since installation, the Patronus frequency humming in its base architecture at a register just below audible. Standing in front of it now, Harry could feel what he couldn't see, a structured working being applied to the other side, careful and deliberate, designed to look like a passive adjustment. Maintenance work. If you didn't know what the maintenance tone was supposed to sound like, he knew exactly what it was supposed to sound like. "All right," he said quietly to the aperture. "What are you?" He pressed his hand to the frame, not through it, to the frame itself, the physical installation of the portal mechanism. The working on the other side was layered. Old Ministry signature in the base, unspeakable work, formal and precise, and underneath it something else. Something that wasn't Ministry and wasn't camouflage and sat in the dimensional architecture with the specific angular quality of. He pulled his hand away. Hermione arrived at a run, which for Hermione meant fast walking with purpose, and her notebook already open. Arjun was 2 steps behind her. "Show me," she said. He showed her. She put her hand to the frame, closed her eyes, read the working with the same focus she applied to everything that mattered. He watched her face. The moment she found what he'd found was visible, a very small tightening around the eyes, the expression she had when something confirmed a theory she'd been hoping was wrong. "It's unraveler architecture," she said. "Yes, but there's Ministry signature underneath it." "Yes." She opened her eyes. "Someone in the Ministry is working with the remnants," she said. "Whatever's left of the unraveler network after Myra's framework collapsed." "Tevoran," Harry said. "He's still out there." "He's still out there," she confirmed. She was already writing. "The working is designed to gradually alter the aperture's directional calibration, not to close it, to redirect it." Harry looked at the aperture. "Where to?" "I need more time to determine the target," she said. "But the mechanism it's sophisticated. This isn't improvised. Someone has been planning this since before the framework fell." She looked at him. "They want the aperture. A working cross-dimensional door is worth considerably more to a remaining unraveler faction than anything else we built." "Because they lost their framework," Harry said. "The collapse took their entire dimensional network. 7 streams freed, all their apertures gone." He thought through it. "They need a replacement entry point, an existing, stable, functional, cross-dimensional aperture." "Ours," Hermione said. "Ours," he agreed. Strange appeared in the doorway of the east wing. He had the cloak active and the look he wore when he'd already processed a situation and was 3 steps into response. "I felt the frequency shift from the mirror dimension," he said. "The unraveler signature." "Tevoran's people," Harry said, "working through a Ministry contact." Strange's jaw tightened. "How long before the redirection completes?" Hermione was calculating. 48 hours at the current rate. "They're moving slowly to avoid detection." She looked at the aperture. "But now that we've detected it, they'll accelerate when they realize the working isn't sitting quiet anymore." "How fast can they accelerate?" "As fast as their most skilled practitioner can work," she said. "Which, if they have a trained unspeakable involved," she paused, "possibly as fast as 12 hours. Strange looked at Harry. Harry looked at Hermione. The 2-second conversation. "We fix the aperture, we find Tevoran, we find the Ministry contact, in that order." Simultaneously, she answered with her eyes. "We do it simultaneously." "Wake Wung," Harry said to Strange, "and call Stark." Strange was already moving. "Already called him." When I felt the frequency shift, before I came here." Harry looked at him. "That was 40 seconds ago." "Stark answers quickly when it's important," Arjun said from behind them, with the particular energy of someone who has been waiting for an opportunity to be useful and has just received one. "I can go to the Ministry side. Come through the aperture, assess the working from that end." Harry looked at him. Arjun had been in the rift space for months as a captive node. His sensitivity to dimensional architecture was extraordinary, not the same as Harry and Hermione's rift collapse signature, but the functional equivalent of someone who had been so thoroughly immersed in dimensional energy that their perceptions had reorganized. "Can you do it without triggering the working?" Harry asked. "I don't trip Ministry wards," Arjun said. "Wrong magical signature. You'd need cover on the Ministry side." "Ron," Hermione said. She was already reaching for the communication mirror she kept in her jacket, the wizarding standard, the one Ron had given her on her first visit back. "He's on shift," she spoke into it. Ron's face appeared, alert and ready, at the kind of speed that meant he'd been awake and already thinking something was off. He listened to 30 seconds of Hermione's summary and said, "I've had 3 unspeakables in and out of the bridge corridor since yesterday. Didn't think anything of it. They've been doing calibration work all week." "That's the cover," Harry said. "Someone authorized calibration work on the aperture," Ron said. He said it with the flat precision of an aura who had just worked out that something in his building was not what it appeared to be. "I can find out who in about 4 minutes. "Find out," Harry said. Ron's face disappeared. Hermione looked at Harry. "We need to protect the aperture mechanism itself, not just block the working on the other side. If Tevoran's people realize we've detected them, They'll hit it hard, Harry said. Before we can counter, yes, she looked at the frame. I can reinforce the base architecture the same way I reinforced the East Wing ward's recursive amplification using the aperture's own frequency. How long? 20 minutes if I have help, 10 if Strange is available. Strange, Harry said. Strange was already back in the doorway. What do you need? Hermione told him. He listened with the focused efficiency of 3 months of working alongside her, asked 2 precise questions, got 2 precise answers, and moved to the left side of the aperture frame while she moved to the right. They worked in the particular synchronization they developed over 3 months of close professional collaboration. Not identical, their approaches were still distinct and intentionally so, but complementary in the specific way of 2 practitioners who had learned each other's rhythms and built something between them that neither could do alone. Strange's dimensional geometry and Hermione's recursive emotional topology feeding each other, the aperture's base architecture taking the reinforcement and running hotter, the Patronus frequency deepening and settling at a register that would resist external manipulation. 8 minutes, not 10. Hermione stepped back, Strange stepped back, the aperture hummed at its new depth and held. Solid, Harry said. He could feel it, the working they'd applied to the other side was still there, but it was pressing against reinforcement that hadn't been there before, the way a lockpick found a lock that had been rekeyed. It'll hold longer than 12 hours. Long enough, Hermione said. Ron's face reappeared in the mirror. The calibration authorization came from Marcus Holt. Senior Unspeakable, 12 years in the Department of Mysteries, clean record until approximately 4 months ago when his financial records show a series of unusual. He stopped. Someone's feeding me information as I talk. Fried. That's me, said a voice from the communication mirror. Hermione blinked. Friday, Mr. Stark integrated the Sanctum's communication system with my network 3 weeks ago, Friday said. I've been monitoring the aperture frequency as a baseline. The shift occurred. I began cross-referencing available databases. A pause. Marcus Holt made contact with an individual matching Teveran's dimensional signature approximately 4 months ago, shortly after the framework collapse. Their meetings have been conducted in locations that avoid both Ministry surveillance and Sanctum ward coverage. They planned for us, Harry said, both surveillance systems. Yes, Friday said. However, they didn't plan for me to integrate both. Harry looked at the mirror. Friday, Mr. Potter, that was excellent work. Thank you, Friday said. I've also located the current meeting site. The East Wing was quiet for a moment. Ron said from the mirror, I'm going to need backup to bring in Holt. You have it, Harry said, from both sides. They went through the aperture in pairs, Harry and Strange first, the aperture spitting them into the Ministry's sub-level corridor with the familiar cold and torchlight, and Ron was there with 2 auras whose names Harry knew and whose competence he trusted, and Friday's coordinates placed Teveran and Holt in a location 6 blocks from the Ministry, in a building that had been vacant for 2 months. The arrest of Marcus Holt took 11 minutes. The encounter with Teveran took considerably longer, not because he fought well though he did, but because he didn't fight at all. Harry came through the door of the vacant building and found Teveran standing in the center of a room that had been set up as a working space, dimensional charts on the walls, several sling rings, an active working running in the corner that Friday immediately flagged as an aperture construction mechanism. Teveran looked at Harry and his expression was the same as it had been in the East Wing the morning of the attack, composed, reasoning, the face of a man who had not stopped believing the thing he believed. You found the mechanism quickly, Teveran said. We found it immediately, Harry said. We felt the frequency shift. Teveran looked at him, the Patronus sensitivity and general attentiveness, Harry said. It's a good aperture, we notice when someone touches it. You can't hold the bridge indefinitely, Teveran said. The framework is gone, Myra is gone, but the structural case for dimensional management doesn't disappear because one methodology failed. The structural case is based on incorrect data, Harry said. He said it without anger, the way he said things that were simply true. Hermione's derivation. You've had access to it. The Sanctum published it 8 weeks ago. Teveran's jaw tightened. The derivation assumes. The derivation is correct, Harry said. I know you've read it. I know you're intelligent enough to have seen where your model fails. He looked at Teveran directly. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to tell you that what you're doing ends today and to ask you what you actually want. Teveran was still. What I want is dimensional stability. So do we, Harry said. We're building it differently. He paused. Myra is rebuilding the reconstruction model. You know her work, you trained under her framework. The reconstruction model addresses dimensional stability without elimination. If the goal is actually the goal and not just the method, you're offering me a seat at the table, Teveran said. He said it with the careful tone of someone identifying something unprecedented. I'm offering you a conversation, Harry said, with the people who have the correct data. After which, if you still think the elimination model is the right answer, you can make that argument mathematically and Hermione will demolish it, and then you'll know. Teveran looked at him for a long moment. The angular face, the too smooth skin on the left side, the eyes of a man who had organized his entire existence around a conviction. And if I refuse, then Strange is outside, Harry said, and we do it the other way. A pause. Teverin looked at the working in the corner, the aperture construction mechanism, the thing he'd been building as a replacement for the framework. He closed his right hand, the working collapsed. The conversation, he said. First, Harry stepped aside from the door. After you, he said. Strange outside looked at Harry when Teverin walked out ahead of him. Harry gave him the look that meant, standing down, handle carefully. Strange read it in 1 second and adjusted, the cloak settling from combat-ready to something more neutral. Teverin noticed. The cloak makes its own decisions, he said. Constantly, Strange said. Does that concern you? I've made my peace with it, Strange said. They walked Teverin back to the ministry in the cold morning air, which was doing the particular London thing of being grey and wet, and somehow still pleasant if you were from there. And Harry walked beside Teverin with the easy presence of someone who had escorted people who were not exactly prisoners, but were not exactly free in the ambiguous space between, and had learned how to make that space feel less like a corridor and more like a room. Myra told you the conservation model was wrong, Teverin said at one point. Hermione told her, Harry said, in the rift space, during the framework destruction. Yes, she stopped fighting, Teverin said, not accusingly, trying to understand something. She read the derivation, Harry said. She's a mathematician. The mathematics was more persuasive than the circumstances. Teverin was quiet for a moment. That's a specific kind of courage, he said. To change your mind in the middle of the thing you've built your life around. Yeah, Harry said. It is. They went inside. By noon, Holt had been suspended pending investigation. Teverin was in a ministry meeting room with 3 unspeakables and strange and a copy of Hermione's complete derivation. And the aperture in the east wing of the sanctum was running at 140% of its installation strength with no sign of interference. Harry found Hermione in the sanctum library at 12:30. She was predictably writing. She'd been writing since they'd come back through the aperture 2 hours ago, debrief notes, technical documentation, and addendum to the aperture reinforcement working that Strange would want for the sanctum records. He sat on the floor with his back against the settee, which was where he always sat. Teverin's cooperating, he said. She looked up, genuinely. He read the first 40 pages of the derivation before the meeting ended, Harry said. He had 14 questions, 2 of them were good ones. Which 2, he told her. She wrote them down because of course she did, and then she sat back and looked at her notes with the expression of someone updating a model with new data. The reconstruction model needs those addressed, she said. I'll send them to Myra. Myra will enjoy them, Harry said. Myra will be annoyed by them and then enjoy them, Hermione said. She does that. She paused. Like someone else I know. He looked at her. I don't do that. You absolutely do that. I'm never annoyed. You were annoyed for 6 days when Stark rebuilt the amplifier without telling you and the frequency range increased. I wasn't annoyed. I was concerned about the calibration. You made the same face you make when you're annoyed. I have one face. You have many faces, she said. I know all of them. He looked at her, the library around them, the afternoon light in gold bars across the floor, 11 years and 3 months and everything that had accumulated in them. She had ink on her left hand, which was constant, and her hair was the particular state it got to when she'd been writing for several hours and had stopped noticing what her hands were doing to it, and she was looking at him with the expression that was the clearest one, the one with nothing in front of it. The aperture's secure, he said. Yes. Teverin's cooperating. Yes. Holt's suspended. Yes. Is there anything currently on fire, he said. She consulted her mental checklist with visible efficiency. Not at this immediate moment. Good, he said. He got up from the floor and sat on the settee beside her, which was the first time in 3 months he'd sat on the settee rather than the floor, a fact she registered with the slight widening of her eyes that meant she'd noticed and found it significant. Then I want to talk about something. The bridge, she said. No, well, adjacent. He looked at his hands, which was a thing he did when he was choosing words carefully. We've been back and forth for 3 months. Ministry sanctum, building the bridge, working the case, going home for dinners and weekends and coming back Monday. Yes, she said, and it's exactly what we wanted, what we said we wanted, both worlds. It has been, she said. She was watching him carefully, the way she watched things when she was reading more than words. But I've been thinking about structure, he said. The bridge exists, the work is ongoing. The synthesis research, the reconstruction model, the aperture network Farouk is proposing, he paused. All of it needs a permanent home, not a corridor between 2 places, an actual institution. She was very still. What kind of institution? The kind that has both worlds in it simultaneously, he said. Research, training, the crossover synthesis taught formally, not translation between the 2 systems, what you called it, the new thing. He looked at her. A school for the thing we built. The library was quiet. You've been planning this, she said. Thinking about it, he said. Since Yuna came back with those papers, since Farouk proposed the aperture network, since Arjun started his own research track. He paused. Since Ron stood in this doorway and said, show me the library, and meant it genuinely. He looked at the shelves. We have the theory, we have the practitioners, we have the data, we have the bridge. He looked at her. What we don't have is the place where it all lives together. Hermione opened her notebook. She'd had it open the whole time. Harry looked at the page she'd already been on when he sat down. It was a floor plan. He looked at it. You've been planning this? Thinking about it, she said, with the slight smile that meant she'd been a lot further along than thinking. The east wing of the sanctum has 3 unused floors. The Ministry has an entire sublevel that's been empty since the Second Wizarding War because no department wants the rooms closest to the Department of Mysteries. She turned the notebook to show him. 2 buildings, 2 worlds, 1 institution, the bridge as the literal center, the aperture as the main corridor between them. She looked at the plan. I've been talking to the Ancient One about the Sanctum space. And, she said, and I am quoting precisely, I thought you'd never ask. Harry looked at her. The warm thing in his chest was very warm and very large. And the Ministry space. Shacklebolt owes us several significant favors, she said. The sub-level rooms are technically available for allocation. I've been writing the proposal for 6 weeks. 6 weeks, he said. Since the aperture installation settled and I could calculate the stable footprint, she said. I wanted the numbers to be solid before I said anything. He looked at the floor plan, the 2 buildings sketched on facing pages, the bridge drawn between them as a literal architectural element, the rooms labeled in Hermione's precise handwriting: synthesis, research, training space, library integration, rift space, access point, dimensional archive. And at the center, in slightly larger letters, the name she'd written at the top of the page: the Granger Potter Institute for Cross-Dimensional Magical Studies. He looked at the name. He looked at her. You put your name first, he said. It's alphabetical, she said. It's not alphabetical by first name. It's alphabetical by the name that's more recognizable in an academic context, she said. Your name opens doors, mine builds what's behind them, together. It's exactly right, he said. You put your name first, good. She looked at him, you're sure? Hermione, he said with the particular patience of someone who has known a person for 11 years and watched them undervalue themselves in specific and recurring ways. You built the theory, you built the mathematics, you built the bridge. He held her gaze. You put your name first. She looked at the floor plan for a moment. I also have funding proposals, she said. Of course you do. Stark has already verbally committed. Of course he has. And the Ancient One indicated that the Sanctum's existing endowment could. Hermione, he said. What? Is there any part of this that you haven't already sorted? She considered. The governance structure, she said. I've been going back and forth on whether a joint board between the Ministry and the Sanctum is functionally workable or whether we need an independent body. Independent body, he said without hesitation. She looked at him. What? Because the Ministry will try to classify everything and the Sanctum will try to sequester everything, and an independent body has neither institutional instinct and can actually do the work. He paused. Also because you'd run it better without either of them telling you what to do. She was quiet for a moment. Then the directorship. Joint, he said. You and me. You hate administrative work. I hate administrative work that doesn't matter, he said. This matters. He looked at the floor plan. And I'm good at the parts you're bad at. She opened her mouth. You're bad at saying no to people who want things from the Institute, he said. You'll agree to every research proposal because you'll find merit in all of them. I'm good at saying no to things that aren't ready yet. She closed her mouth. That's accurate, she said with the expression of someone who had audited their own behavior and arrived at an honest result. We do the administrative work together, he said, the way we do everything. Together, she said. Always, he said. She looked at the floor plan. He looked at her looking at it, the slight softening in her expression that she got when something she'd been holding carefully was allowed to be real. 3 months of working alongside each other in 2 worlds, back and forth through a silver door, building something that had no precedent and required constant invention. He'd watched her do it with the kind of focused joy he'd only ever seen her have around things that were genuinely, specifically hers, not assigned, not expected, not what someone else needed her to be. Hers. The Institute needs a library, she said. Integrated from both collections, he said. The Sanctum side and the Ministry archive. Wong will want input on the cataloging system. Wong should run the cataloging system, Harry said. He's better at it than anyone. He is, she agreed. She was writing again, additions to the floor plan, expanding into a 3rd page, the ideas arriving faster now that the frame was in place. The training program should have 3 tracks. 1 magic practitioners learning dimensional sorcery, camotage sorcerers learning intent-based systems, and the synthesis track, for the people who want both, he said. Who are the most interesting ones, she said. Arjun, Una. The practitioners coming through from streams we haven't even contacted yet. She paused. Myra, you'd have Myra teaching in the Institute, he said. She developed the theoretical foundation for the synthesis, Hermione said. She went the wrong direction with it, but the foundation was hers. She deserves to see it built correctly. She paused. And frankly, she's brilliant and I want access to her thinking on a regular basis. I know, he said. That's not criticism. She looked up at him. You'd have Teverin teaching eventually, she said. Once the reconstruction model is developed enough, someone who's been inside the framework, who understands the unraveler perspective, has information the students need, Harry said. Yes, he paused. We're building something that includes the people who were wrong. We're building something that assumes people can change when they have correct information, she said, which is not the same as assuming they will. But if we don't build for the possibility, then we're not really building for change, he said. She held his gaze. Yes, Strange came in without knocking, which was his standard operational mode in the Sanctum Library and had not changed in 3 months. He looked at the notebook in Hermione's hands and then at Harry and then at the notebook again, and his expression did the thing it did when he was processing something that fell outside his prediction. What is that? He said. A floor plan, Hermione said. For what? An institute, Harry said. Strange came to look at the plan. He read it in the same way he read everything: fast, complete, missing nothing. He read the name at the top. He looked at the East Wing allocation. He read the governance structure notes Hermione had started adding. He looked at the joint directorship notation. He was quiet for a moment. The East Wing has good light on the upper floors, he said. Hermione looked at him. For a library, he said, the Upper East Wing, better light than the current Sanctum Library if you're integrating collections. I'd want the research archive separate from the teaching library, she said immediately. Obviously, two separate spaces. He looked at the floor plan. There's a room on the 4th floor that isn't on your plan. It was sealed before I arrived. The Ancient One hasn't opened it for me, but the dimensional resonance in it, he paused. I think it was a teaching space. Something old. He looked at her. She might open it for the Institute. Harry looked at Strange. Strange looked at the plan. He had the expression of someone who had been waiting for a very long time for something worth the full application of what they were capable of and had just been shown the blueprint. There's a seat on the governance board, Harry said. Strange looked at him. I'm not good at governance. You're not good at being governed, Harry said. You're excellent at establishing standards and enforcing them. Strange was quiet. Is that what the board does? Among other things, Harry said. Another pause. The cloak will need access to the library, Strange said. It's been eyeing the Sanctum's collection for 3 years and has opinions. The cloak can have library access, Hermione said. It will reorganize things. We can discuss reorganization protocols, she said. The cloak of levitation from somewhere down the corridor made a sound that was in the general category of satisfied. Strange sat down in the chair that was technically not his, which in the Sanctum Library meant the chair everyone treated as strangers. He looked at the floor plan one more time. When do you want to present it to the Ancient One? Tonight, Hermione said. Stark, he'll come through the aperture, Harry said. He's been doing it twice a week anyway. Loki will find out before we finish the meeting and appear uninvited, Strange said. Yes, Harry said, and he'll have useful information in an insufferable manner and will somehow become part of the governance conversation despite not being asked. He paused. We should probably give him an official role. What role? Strange said. Harry thought about it. Cross-dimensional intelligence liaison, he said. Strange looked at him. That's a made-up title. All titles are made up, Harry said. At least this one's honest about what he actually does. Strange was quiet for a moment and then said, with the expression of someone who has lost an argument that hasn't been had yet, fine. Hermione was still writing. The floor plan had expanded to 5 pages. Harry looked at the 5th page where she'd sketched something quickly, not architectural, more conceptual, a diagram of the connection between the two worlds rendered as a bridge with roots on both sides growing into each other. She'd labeled it without thinking in the small handwriting she used for notes she wasn't planning to show anyone. He read it. What we built from the wrong door. He looked at her. She was still writing and hadn't noticed him reading it. He thought about the wrong door, the aperture gone violet and then white, the sound like the universe clearing its throat, the landing on the sanctum floor with their wands up in a room that smelled of old magic and possibility. 10 days that had changed every axis. The Patronus blazing through the pocket dimension and the membrane lighting up. The stag running through the rift space interior, mapping what had been unmappable. The keystone coming apart under their combined working, 2 magical systems speaking in each other's frequencies. Hermione in the rift space turning to look at him with the expression that had always been there, waiting. After tomorrow is now. He looked at Strange, who was reading something on his phone and pretending not to be present in the conversation in the way he pretended not to be present in conversations he was fully present in. He looked at the library around them, the Sanctum's old books and Hermione's 11 pages of notes, and the light that was now fully afternoon, rich and specific. He looked at the aperture he could feel through the walls of the building, the silver door between 2 worlds, steady and breathing and open. Then he looked at Hermione. She felt him looking and glanced up. The expression she gave him was the clearest one, nothing in front of it, everything behind it, complete. The proposal, she said. You want to present it tonight? I want to present it tonight, he said. And tomorrow we start building it. Tomorrow we start building it, he said. She looked at him for one more moment with everything she was, which was considerable and specific and entirely, precisely her. Then she looked back at the floor plan and kept writing. The afternoon light moved across the library walls and the sanctum held its old patient breath, and in the east wing the silver aperture kept its steady frequency, 2 worlds, 1 door open. It was, Harry thought, a very good foundation. Outside, New York went on in its enormous, indifferent, extraordinary way, not knowing what was in the building on Bleecker Street. Not knowing about the bridge or the institute or the 2 people from the wrong dimension who had arrived in the right place at the right time and built something that neither world had ever seen. It never knew, it didn't need to, the work knew. The work was the thing, and the work was just getting started.